Chapter 533. Yes, your understanding is absolutely correct. In the face of the emperor's question, immortal Da Huang acted as if he was the most supreme in the world. His Majesty asked, "Since my understanding is correct, I also understand that only the country that you are sure belongs to can live with the world, while the other opposing countries should all die, right? Even if this country has no future, no strength, and is defeated on the battlefield, even so, they are still destined to follow the trend of the times and hope. Is that right?" Immortal Da Huang said domineeringly, "Yes, it is. Heaven's will is like a knife, it has long been decided. How can it be disobeyed?" His Majesty asked in a low voice, "Then may I ask who is Heaven's will? Why is it so incredible that it cannot be disobeyed?" Immortal Da Huang was taken aback when he heard the question. It was not because of the Emperor of Yutang's question, but because he had noticed in shock that many of the people below had suddenly become agitated. Their gazes that were looking at him were as if they wanted to devour him. Have I offended all of you?" He did not know that in the short conversation just now, His Majesty the Emperor of Yutang had successfully twisted the so-called heavens will into their own will to impose on others. He had even successfully led them to stand against the entire empire of Yutang's people. He had successfully set a living negative example and made everyone in Yutang share a common enemy. The people of Yutang who were present shared the same thought. They only had one thought in mind. It was not that they had never seen unreasonable people before, but they had never seen one to this extent. Whoever you say can do it. You have to do it even if you can't? Based on what? Because we can't do it even if we win? Based on what? Who do you think you are? If you're so King awesome, why don't you ascend to the heavens? What you said was already so awesome. Similar thoughts were guided by His Majesty with just a few words, deeply rooted in the hearts of everyone present. These people were like kindling. Once they left this place, they would be like a spark that could start a prairie fire in an instant. Immortal Da Huang had now become the public enemy of the entire empire of Yutang. His Majesty, the Emperor of Yutang, had successfully used the fool to incite the people of Yutang to be united against a common enemy. He then looked at Immortal Da Huang again and said softly, "I have yet to ask for the name of this expert before me." Immortal Da Huang was taken aback. "I didn't tell them my name?" After a pause, he raised his head to look into the distance and pretended to say, "I am. You can just call me Immortal Da Huang. I have left the mortal world and have gone through countless reincarnations. I have long forgotten my own name." The corners of the emperor's mouth twitched. "How many cycles? Are you trying to say that you've already died so many times? So much so that you can't even remember your name from many lifetimes ago?" Was that what he meant? Not only did he not receive the expected gazes of reverence and worship, when he said those words that were full of pretentiousness, instead, he received a large amount of fiery and hateful gazes. Everyone was staring at him, as if he was their father's murderer. It was as if they wanted to devour him alive. The Emperor of Yutang hummed softly, his expression unchanged as he said calmly, "So you are Immortal Da Huang. I wonder which sect do you belong to? That sect must be very famous, and everyone knows about it." Immortal Da Huang lifted his head and said nonchalantly, "I am from. I can't tell you this." In that instant, even His Majesty could not help but be caught between laughter and tears. Finally, he managed to suppress it. Where did this idiot come from? Could he be any weirder? Did the elders in your sect really feel at ease letting you come out alone? Did they know that your pretentiousness had turned you into a fool? They actually, fortunately. A holler came from the clouds far away at this moment. "Vile spawn, what nonsense are you spouting now?" A person suddenly appeared in midair. The newcomer was dressed in a starry robe that shimmered with starlight. He had an extraordinary air about him, and his face was filled with impatience and helplessness. This also showed the anxiety in his heart. The newcomer arrived at lightning speed, grabbed Immortal Da Huang, and rose into the sky, disappearing into the clouds at the same speed. The entire process took no more than 5 breaths of time. He only said, "Your Majesty, please do not listen to this fool's nonsense. I will personally make a trip to the palace to explain the reason to your Majesty." Other than that, there was no trace of him. It was like a dream. His Majesty frowned, but he still smiled and said, "It's just a foolish person doing something foolish. There's no need to make a fuss about it. Don't let it dampen the joy of our hero's return." The crowd responded in unison, their voices shaking the heavens and the earth. Though His Majesty's face was expressionless, he was actually thinking hard in his heart. What the hell was going on? The newcomer's abilities were not to be underestimated. They were not to be trifled with. Their background must be extraordinary. As for the heavens will that immortal Da Huang spoke of, what was it? What kind of changes would it cause? As His Majesty pondered, he vaguely recalled that he seemed to have seen something like this before. But he could not recall where he had seen it. He could not help feeling frustrated. The princes behind His Majesty all had different expressions on their faces. Yutong had broken the siege of the Four Empires and had defeated Dongxian completely. There was nothing to worry about from now on. No matter who ascended to the throne, he or she could at least be the emperor for a few decades. This was an undeniable reality. But what did Father Emperor mean? Did the Crown Prince? Did he? What? Do I still have hope? If he did, how should I work hard? I'm still weak in the military, and so is the government. How should I strengthen them? What should I do to pull the Crown Prince off the throne and replace him with me? The princes were deep in thought. Occasionally, their gazes would meet, but all they could see from each other's eyes was viciousness and wariness. His Majesty was deep in thought as well. His thoughts weighed heavily on his mind. Now that the situation was settled, he hoped that old Chiu would return and recover quickly. He was the only one who knew about that person. That supreme cloud had left a message about his grandson, but he had never returned. He had waited for such a long time, but there was no news at all. Now that the war had ended and the external worries were gone, his grandson could finally come back? What did the little fellow look like now? What was his personality like? Could he shoulder the responsibility? How he wished to see him now. As Yutong's emperor and people waited eagerly, they finally saw dust billowing from afar. Everyone was invigorated to see the returning warriors that they had been anticipating for a long time. A smile appeared on His Majesty's almost frozen face. Just as he was about to step forward, he turned back to look, and his expression darkened. Where did the Crown Prince and the princes go? The faces of the ministers and guards at the side were all ashen. For a moment, no one responded. Feeling that the weather was too cold, the princes would probably stand for a while before going back to their carriages to rest with a heater. When they were tired from sitting, they would come out and stand for a while, repeating the process. Who would have thought that His Majesty would ask at this exact moment, when the princes were all running away? "Your Majesty, the weather is too cold." The princes cough. The Grand Tutor looked conflicted. Ridiculous. His Majesty immediately flew into a rage. He was so angry that he could barely breathe. He exploded like a thunderbolt. Bitter cold? What bitter cold? The soldiers have braved the bitter cold at the border to fight, to sacrifice, to risk their lives, to die. They have been protected by the soldiers, and have enjoyed the honor that has been ensured through countless sacrifices. Now that the soldiers have returned, they are afraid of the cold, even if they are asked to wait here? What kind of nonsense is this? Is this the royal demeanor that you've taught? The meeting lasted until 9:30. There was really no time to write today. Anxious. Only one thing was more urgent. Chapter 534. The Grand Tutor was upset. As a teacher, how could he not be angry? Why were his students so useless? They were just standing outside in the cold wind for a while. Would they die from the cold if they stood there for a while? However, they were princes. How could they be compared to normal students? What he could do was only advise them. How could he teach them? The Grand Tutor had even thought that if there was a prince who insisted on standing outside and fell sick, it might make the emperor look at him in a different light. "Get these bastards out here right now," His Majesty roared furiously. "Even if they all freeze to death here, they are not allowed to move a single inch. If anyone dares to go inside to warm up, I will strip him of his identity and let him rest here forever." His Majesty's words were full of severity. The 7 or 8 princes who left without permission all got out of their carriages. All of them lowered their heads, not daring to look at the king's face. "What the hell did I give birth to? Look at you guys. You don't have the manners of a ruler." The king humphed and turned his head. He looked into the distance, but there was only disappointment in his heart. How dare this kind of trash dream of inheriting my throne and ascend to the throne? Ridiculous. If I pass the throne to them, I won't be able to face my ancestors even if I die. "Crown Prince," the king said coldly, "come to my side." The crown prince walked over shivering. Half of it was because he was scared, and the other half was because he was freezing. The crown prince was a noble, but his cultivation was shallow. He had just come out of the warm carriage. Even if he wanted to behave better, it was beyond his ability. He was really embarrassed. "Forget it. Go back." The king closed his eyes and sighed helplessly. Looking at the crown prince, he was scared and shivering. His eyes were vicious. He was angry, but he didn't dare to say anything. He was full of evil thoughts. The king's face was bleak. The helplessness and disappointment in his heart had reached its peak. He was so depressed that he wanted to die. It was not just disappointment anymore. It was hopelessness and desperation. These princes, could they really only be like this? At this moment, Upeza could not help but feel boundless regret for his past self. Because of the strange poison in his body, his energy was extremely limited. It was already beyond his ability to worry about the affairs of the country. In addition, there was the first prince, who he had never had to worry about, in front of him. As a result, for a long time, he had never paid attention to his sons. So it turned out that their minds and sentiments had already been corrupted to this extent. None of these princes would be able to inherit the great cause, especially now that they were preparing for the future of Tianxian continent. They were not worthy, and did not even have the right to try. A man hates his wife and son the most, the king sighed in his heart. Looking into the distance, the army was getting closer and closer. He could already see the neat formation of the army and the neat and clean flags. His Majesty's eyes couldn't help but warm up. In that instant his blood boiled. In an instant, he tossed these troublesome matters aside. Nothing was more important than welcoming the return of the army and the heroic souls. He tidied himself up and strode out to welcome them. Almost at the same time, a command rang out. The three armies stopped in their tracks at the same time. "Dismount! Salute!" A few leading generals stepped out from the crowd and walked forward. His Majesty heaved a long sigh of relief, forcefully suppressing the urge to let his tears flow freely. It was tragic. It was truly tragic. Marshal Fu Baogua is still guarding the old site of the Fortress of Resilience, intending to rebuild the fortress and build an impregnable fortress. He said that we should send our regards to your Majesty. As long as Fu Baogua is still around, the Fortress of Resilience will forever remain in Yutong's hands. Shangguan Lingxiu represented all the generals and reported to His Majesty. At the same time, she also stated the main reason why Fu Baogua did not return to the capital to report on his duties as the Eastern Frontline's marshal. It was one thing for the emperor and his officials to be in harmony, but they still had to go through the necessary procedures. It was not a pleasant sight to see someone with ulterior motives plotting against their ruler. "Welcome." His Majesty's lips quivered. "Heroes return. I am proud of all of you. I am proud of what all of you have done. Warriors, what comes next is what I, the Emperor, have to do. I swear to the heavens, be it the warriors who are still here, or the loyal souls, who have fallen into eternal slumber, I will never let you down." Behind him, a deafening salute boomed. "My warriors," His Majesty bellowed. "Home." Tens of thousands of warriors wept at the same time. Touching the bundles on their backs, hot tears streamed down their cheeks. "Brothers, it's home. We're home. I'll send you home." There was jubilation both in and out of Tiantang City. Countless people were laughing with tears in their eyes. His Majesty personally accompanied Qiu Jinhan's carriage to the residence of Qiu. According to conventional etiquette, no matter how outstanding the Ritterne's meritorious service was, there was no reason for an emperor to send his official home. Today, however, His Majesty had broken this rule and sent old Marshal Qiu home personally. The weather was really cold. This time, old Mistress Qiu did not wait 100 miles away, but waited by the city gate. Finally, she saw the carriage carrying her husband arrive. Only when she saw her husband's peaceful face, As if he was sleeping soundly, did she finally burst into tears. These were tears of heartache, but they were also tears of relief. Since the beginning of the expedition, the ominous signs that had never been there had weighed down on old Mistress Chiu like a mountain, suffocating her. A few days ago, she had even felt that her husband was about to leave the netherworld. At that moment, the old mistress had wanted to follow him to the netherworld. Fortunately, her mind was clear, and she still hoped that her husband could return. She could not help but feel fortunate. If she had died in vain that day, her husband would have been left to sleep alone. How would the old man live if he woke up? Now everything had finally passed. Even though her husband was unconscious, he had not died in the battle. He could definitely wake up. This was enough. This was heaven's blessing, giving them the chance to walk on together. Marquis Yin stepped forward to say a few words of comfort, and was about to speak to His Majesty when the Emperor unexpectedly said softly, "Wait a moment, I want to speak to you." Marquis Yin rolled his eyes and said, "All right. You want me to wait, I'll wait." And this short wait was not a short wait, but a long wait that lasted all the way until nightfall. By the time everything was done, it was already deep into the night. His Majesty returned to the palace with a heavy heart. The first thing he did was to issue an order. Search through the secret documents of the royal family, especially those that have been sealed for a long time, including the documents of the previous dynasty. Find all of them, and place them in the royal study. A single order and 3 consecutive all of them almost exhausted the eunuchs. Then, His Majesty sat there with his eyes closed, heaving long and short sighs. More than 1,000,000 soldiers. His Majesty's long sigh was not an act, it was genuine heartache. After a long time, he spread out the brush and paper and wrote a few words. "The loyal soul shall not be lost, the noble spirit shall live forever." And. Chapter 535. Then, His Majesty summoned the Board of Revenue Minister and asked, "How much gold and silver is left in the national treasury?" The Board of Revenue Minister paled upon hearing the question. About less than 20 million taels of silver. In terms of daily expenses, the national treasury still had 20 million taels of silver in reserve. It could last for at least a year, and was not considered a small amount. However, it was not enough now. Not even a fraction. There were more than 1,000,000 loyal souls. How much was 100 taels of silver for each person? Moreover, how could 100 taels of silver be enough for each person? Not enough. Far from enough. His Majesty murmured and asked, "How much silver do we have on hand? I want an exact figure." "Less than 5 million taels." The Board of Revenue Minister answered swiftly this time. He was a little confused about the Emperor's intention in asking such a question. Even if the Emperor wanted to reward the army, it could not just be cash. Besides, this amount of money was not enough at all. It was not even enough for the army's pay, not to mention the pension and other expenses. It was at most a drop in the bucket. 5 million taels. This is enough to fulfill one of my ideas. His Majesty frowned and massaged the space between his brows as he said slowly, "Send my order to the Board of Works. Have them work through the night to cast 3 million silver coins." "Huh?" The Board of Revenue Minister lifted his head, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. "What are you trying to do? We don't have enough money to begin with. We're already struggling to make ends meet with this amount of money. Yet you want us to cast silver coins? Moreover, what was the use of silver coins? Our nation's expenditure has never been in the form of gold and silver coins. Are you trying to promote the new currency system? But we've never been prepared for this before. The implications are too great. It's not something that can be sorted out in a short time." Seeing the Minister of Revenue's puzzled expression, the Emperor explained, "This batch of silver coins is not for circulation. On the front side of the silver coins, there are 8 words engraved. Loyal souls never fade, noble spirit lives forever. Under those 8 words, there should also be a jade seal. On the back is Yutong's national flag. This is the basic model. Then, engrave the name of a fallen soldier on each of the silver coins. Make sure that every single one of them has died." His Majesty said sadly, "I want all the orphans of the fallen soldiers. In addition to the military medals, the pension they deserve, and the posthumous rewards. I also want a silver coin for loyal souls. Every family will have to follow the instructions. The Minister of Revenue gradually understood the emperor's intentions. In a low voice he replied, "Yes. This loyal soul silver coin cannot be used for spending. It is strictly forbidden to be traded. However, those who hold this coin will receive half of the tuition for their children's education. If there is a problem, they will be given priority. If they are bullied or humiliated, they will be given priority to see their parents. Your Majesty, this official knows that Your Majesty sympathizes with the orphans of the fallen soldiers. But the distribution of these silver coins is a huge matter. There are too many implications. Let's just say that silver coins are easily obtainable and easy to cast. If such a large amount of silver coins are distributed, it will be hard to avoid the situation where one can't distinguish the real from the fake. Moreover, these silver coins are extremely effective. If someone were to use them illegally, it will be a huge problem," the Minister of Revenue said after a moment of contemplation. His Majesty said faintly, "If this was an easy matter, I would have issued the edict directly. Why would I need to discuss it with you? I only have one request: they cannot be used illegally." The Board of Revenue Minister was dumbfounded. Cannot be used illegally? This was already a huge problem, okay? What can I do? Aren't you making things difficult for me? You may leave. His Majesty said, "Think about it. Think about how to operate it. It cannot be used illegally. It cannot be. You may leave. Let me know when you have thought it through." The Board of Revenue's Minister of Revenue retreated with a long face. He thought to himself, "Looks like I'll have to spend the night discussing how to avoid these troubles. What a tough life I have." As the Minister of Revenue of this poor country, he had to tighten his belt every single day, wishing he could split a copper coin into 8 petals. In this position, he had to ask for money everywhere he went. Who knew how many people he had offended? Every time there was a court report, the one who was accused the most was me. I have it easy. I have extra work today, and it has to be such a headache. It's killing me. The Board of Revenue Minister left. Is Marquis Yin still around? His Majesty asked. Your Majesty, Marquis Yin has been waiting in the side hall for a long time. Let him in, said His Majesty. As they spoke, the eunuchs had already filled the royal study with piles of books. Behind them, there was still an endless stream of people carrying books that looked like a small mountain. Under normal circumstances, the emperor's study was strictly forbidden for too many people to enter or leave. Even if there was an edict from the emperor, it had to wait for the emperor to leave before it could be carried out. After all, too many people entering and leaving would cause potential danger. However, the number of books that the emperor wanted this time was not small. Among them were many ancient books from the previous dynasty. It was not a small number. Roughly estimating, it would probably fill up 2 of the emperor's study rooms. Because of this, the head of the eunuchs reported it immediately. Everyone knew that His Majesty placed great importance on this information search and did not dare to slack off. Put some in first. When the search is done and we're sure that there are no omissions, move the rest in, His Majesty ordered. Before his words echoed in the air, Marquis Yin walked in hurriedly. What is this? Marquis Yin could not help being shocked when he saw the room full of books. Although the royal study was called a study, there were indeed quite a number of books in it. However, its main purpose was for the emperor to handle political affairs and read memorials. It was rare for there to be so many books. Let's not talk about this first. His Majesty's eyes were fixed on Marquis Yin. How is the matter that I asked you to investigate previously? What's the result? Marquis Yin rolled his eyes and sat down on the armchair, saying unhurriedly, Bring me a cup of tea first. In the entire empire of Yutong, including the 3 most renowned rogues of the capital city, Qiu Jianhan, Lung Douyin and Fang Qingtian, there was no one who dared to be so presumptuous in front of Emperor Yutong, Yu Peiza. However, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds Yin Xiaoyao dared. Faced with His Majesty's inquiry, he had asked for tea and water. The emperor closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Servants, serve the tea. Serve your imperial snow sprout. Marquis Yin said, I like the taste. His Majesty closed his eyes again and breathed in deeply. Serve it. Serve the snow sprout tribute tea. The tea was served. Delighted, Marquis Yin extended his hand to take it. Wait. His Majesty stopped him. Let's talk about business first. You can drink the tea after that. It doesn't matter how much you drink, but before the matter is finished, there's no hurry to drink the tea. Marquis Yin closed his eyes and inhaled deeply before exhaling slowly. His Majesty looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Do you think I can't subdue you? Obviously, Marquis Yin's weakness was his addiction to tea, a weakness that could be dealt with. Which matter? The war? Marquis Yin finally decided to give in. There was no need to be so serious about some things, especially when it was the ruler of an empire. If he gave in, then so be it. Could he really be the one who was superior to him? I mean, I asked you to investigate. His Majesty lowered his voice and whispered into Marquis Yin's ear. Is your precious son Yin Yang, supreme clouds matter? Marquis Yin inhaled deeply again and exhaled slowly. His chi and meridians stretched out. Have you found any clues? His Majesty asked. Marquis Yin sighed deeply. I'm dying of thirst. Guards. The veins on His Majesty's forehead throbbed. Arrest this person who dares to look down on the king and deceive. Forget it. Marquis Yin waved his hand and said with a chuckle, let me tell you clearly, with my current cultivation base and ability, the people under you can't stop me from doing anything. Do you understand? I mean anything. His Majesty almost choked on his breath. His eyes were wide as he pointed at a certain someone. Good lad, you've grown up. You dare to challenge your elder brother now? But didn't you already have this ability a long time ago? Tell me, what do you want to do? Tell me. Looking at the emperor who was like a different person, Marquis Yin was a little dumbfounded. He raised his hand and said, I'll speak. Speak. What nonsense are you spouting? Actually, I'm just spouting nonsense. I didn't find anything. Marquis Yin shrugged readily. I didn't. His Majesty was dizzy and furious. With a wave of his hand, the cup of tea that he had just poured for Marquis Yin fell to the ground with a loud thud, shattering into pieces. You didn't find anything? What are you keeping me in suspense for? Is this your F*King business? If you're so cocky, why don't you go to heaven? Marquis Yin sighed. With a wave of his hand, the teapot that was placed far away flew over, and poured a cup of tea in an orderly manner. He said softly, I'll be honest with you. It's not that I didn't want you to investigate, but I really didn't find anything. Actually, I still don't understand. Why do you have to find out who Supreme Cloud is? Isn't it enough to know that he's harmless to you? His Majesty sat on the throne angrily, his eyes glaring at Marquis Yin's face like lightning. Is it really that important who is the 9 Supremes, and who is Supreme Cloud? Marquis Yin said softly. No matter who he is, he's Yutong's loyal supporter. Even if you found out, what can you do? Supreme Cloud has been concealing his identity since the beginning, not wanting anyone to know his true self. Don't you know why? Marquis Yin asked, as if he was asking the emperor, but also as if he was talking to himself. He's the only survivor among the 9 Supremes. If he wants revenge, he must first be safe. Only with safety first can he talk about the future. On the other hand, as long as Supreme Cloud's identity isn't revealed, it's one more day of intimidation to the whole Tianxian continent. The unique intimidation that belongs to the 9 Supremes. However, if Supreme Cloud's identity is revealed one day and his identity and background are dug out, how long do you think the legend of Yutong's 9 Supremes can last? Once others find out about his identity, he'll probably die a violent death in less than 3 days. By then, the 9 Supremes will really become a legend, Marquis Yin said. So stop investigating. His Majesty's gaze slowly turned gentle and helpless as he said, How can I not understand this? In the past, I wouldn't have investigated so deliberately. However, the situation has changed now. You should know that the leader of the 9 Supremes, Supreme Earth, is my eldest prince. He has left behind his bloodline by chance. It was Supreme Cloud who informed me about this back then. His Majesty closed his eyes helplessly. Do you know? This also means that this Supreme Cloud can now control the imperial power, and even the heir to the throne. If I were to pass the throne to that child in the end, this supreme cloud would be the regent. I don't want to investigate, but I have to. His Majesty sighed. This was the helplessness of an emperor. The mind of an emperor was always unpredictable, especially when someone or something was beyond the control of the imperial power. Marquis Yin snorted. If that's the case, then all the more we can't investigate. Do you think what I said just now, that you can't stop me from doing anything with the capability you possess, is a joke? Unfortunately, this is the truth and the reality. I'm already like this, let alone Supreme Cloud. His Majesty was speechless. Marquis Yin looked askance at him and said unabashedly, Look at these sons you've given birth to. What are they? Other than fighting for power, they're selfish and vicious. Each of them is like a quail to the outside world, but a venomous snake to the inside. Is there even one of them decent enough? I say. His Majesty lifted his head helplessly. What? The corners of Marquis Yin's lips twitched. Sometimes, I really wonder if you've been cuckolded. Other than the eldest, the others don't resemble you at all. No, it should be that they don't resemble our family at all. Before he could finish his sarcasm, the furious emperor had already smacked a book on his head. Bastard! Marquis Yin knew that he had misspoken. With a cough, he wiped away the crumbs on his face and sat upright as if nothing had happened. I was joking just now. I'm really joking now. His Majesty was trembling with rage. Who asked you to joke? A few more books were smashed on Marquis Yin's head. His Majesty was enraged. What I'm angry about now is why my father was so indiscreet back then, going out to fool around and producing you in the end. You must have been sent by the heavens to anger me. Marquis Yin rolled his eyes. He should be thankful that he went out to fool around. If he only produced you, you'd be even more exhausted. Do you admit that I've helped you a lot of it? A lot of it? A man should have some conscience. Even if he's an emperor or ruler, he can't completely erase his conscience, can he? His Majesty's eyes were rolling back in his head. Seeing that he was about to faint, he pointed a trembling finger at Marquis Yin. You're going to anger me to death. Just as Marquis Yin had said, Marquis Yin had truly helped the Emperor of Yutang a lot. Aside from angering him, there was really nothing to criticize. Marquis Yin rolled his eyes lightly and said, All right, don't be angry. What's the use of being angry? I'll just tell you the truth. That child Yun Yang is extraordinary. He has a heart of gold and a heart of gold. He has no intention of imperial power. Otherwise, even if he's not my son, I'd be more than happy to let him inherit the throne. It's a pity that his child doesn't care about our little foundation. Besides, he's really not Supreme Cloud. I know this very well. His Majesty snorted and glared at him, waiting for Marquis Yin to continue. He was sure that there must be a basis for what Marquis Yin said. That day, when the battle was on the brink, the power of the 9 Supremes unexpectedly appeared to aid the battle. It was the combined power of the 9 Supremes. I was watching from the side then, so this can't be wrong. Yin Yang was also riding his horse and charging in the battle formation then. Therefore, he's definitely not Supreme Cloud. Marquis Yin sighed. On the surface, I was in charge of escorting old Qiu back. But in reality, I was sneaking back to see what was going on. Think about it, it was all your orders. When have I not done my best? His Majesty frowned. But I'll say it one last time, it's really not him. Marquis Yin shrugged helplessly. If you don't even believe me, who else can you believe? We're blood brothers. His Majesty sighed. Blood brother. I'm really blessed to have a blood brother like you. Watching you roam around every day, having fun. I'm so tired that I can't breathe. Marquis Yin glared at him. What are you talking about? Why don't you try saying that again? His Majesty snorted. I'll try then. Am I not speaking the truth? You've been traveling around every day. Isn't this the truth? What kind of life have I been living? Don't you know it yourself? I've suffered a great loss. Do you understand? Marquis Yin's eyes bulged. What did you say? You've suffered a loss? How can you suffer a loss like me? You're not good at anything else as an emperor, but your shamelessness is unparalleled. He stood up abruptly. I wouldn't be angry if you didn't mention this. Since you've brought it up today, I'll reason with you. How dare you say you've suffered a loss? Or have you suffered a loss? You're the high and mighty emperor with the noble status that rules over the world. What about me? The whole F*** country knows that I'm royalty, but the whole F** king country also knows that I'm an illegitimate child, including the sons of royalty. Who has ever greeted me with the clan's greeting? You F** king have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, countless concubines, enjoying all the pleasures of love. But what about me? I'm over 40, but I'm still a bachelor. You have children to continue the bloodline. Even if there's nothing good out of them, it's still a house full of children and grandchildren. As for me, look at me. I'm good-looking, easy to earn money. I don't dare offend anyone, and I have an earth-shattering cultivation base. What kind of life have I been living all these years? Have you suffered a loss? Is it because I don't have many female friends? That's not it at all. Then why am I still a bachelor? It's all thanks to our brilliant father. He's amazing. Before he died, he held my hand and asked me to promise him that I wouldn't get married in this life, and that I wouldn't have children even if I did. He was afraid that it would cause an upheaval in the imperial power. He knew that if I did get married, I would definitely be more promising than you. Let's see who else you have the cheek to say. What about me? Have I suffered a loss? I've sacrificed everything for you. And I haven't even said that I've suffered a loss. How dare you say that you've suffered a loss? Just now, you only said one thing that was right. You said that you're really lucky to have a brother like me. Since you say that you've suffered a loss, why don't we swap? Marquis Yun's eyes bulged as he stomped in anger. Come, let's swap. Let's see if I, Yun Xiaoyao, can be a good emperor. At the very least, I can teach my son well, unlike you. Have you managed to groom a promising son? Don't talk to me, eldest prince. That's because you've taught him well. That's because his child is born promising. You're the only one who can suck up to me and say that you've suffered a loss compared to me. You've suffered a loss. His Majesty was speechless for a moment before he rolled his eyes and said, This was decided by father back then. If you have any objections, go look for him. Chapter 536. His Majesty was speechless for a moment before he murmured, This was father's decision all those years ago. If you have any objections, go look for him. Marquis Yun was enraged, slamming the table with one hand. You Peza, don't you feel guilty saying this? That old man has been dead for so many years. Where can I find him? If I really went to look for him, would I still be able to come back? The brothers glared at each other like fighting cocks. After a long time, His Majesty burst out laughing and said, All right, I won't argue with you anymore. Only you would dare to argue with me like this. You're also my blood brother. Otherwise, your head would have been chopped off a long time ago. Marquis Yun said angrily, Don't King take this as reason and think that I'm happy to argue with you. You won't feel comfortable if you don't let me get angry every once in a while. Will you? If you don't get scolded by me, you'll be lacking something in your heart. His Majesty sighed. Let's not talk about this. Help me think about the succession of the crown prince. This is an urgent matter that must be resolved as soon as possible. There's one more thing. It's about immortal Dahuang today. His Majesty said, Regarding the theory of heaven's will, I do remember there being records of it. Help me look for it. Then we can talk, discuss, and research. Marquis Yun said angrily, You can just find someone else to do this. Why do you have to drag me into this? You even have to accompany me, His Majesty said. It's better that I discuss this with you. I don't trust anyone else. He sighed and said, Brother, we are not young anymore. You should just forget about what father said in the past. Find a woman if you need to. I am the emperor now, and I can totally dispense with that task for you. Marquis Yun was stunned. After a moment of silence, he said bitterly, Forget it. Sigh. There have been many girls who have been kind to me all these years, but I've rejected them all. Now they're either married, dead, or missing. You've said this 10 years too late. You should have said so earlier. Marquis Yun was stunned. He lifted his head and looked at the night sky outside the window. There seemed to be countless bitter emotions flashing in his eyes. Only a faint sigh could be heard. His Majesty looked at the twinkling stars on Marquis Yun's temples and sighed guiltily. All these years, it has been hard on you. The king sighed softly. It's useless to say all this. Marquis Yin smiled bitterly and waved his hand. My biggest mistake is that I was reincarnated into the wrong body. Stop talking about it, this is fate. My life. The two of them sighed together. His Majesty and Marquis Yin, who had been tormented for the entire night, were exhausted. Their backs were sore, and they were completely drained. But even though he felt like his body was being hollowed out, he still didn't ask for help. After all, what they were doing now was a top-secret matter that couldn't be known by ordinary people. If it wasn't for the fact that the two of them were quarreling while tidying up the ancient books to search for clues, this night would probably be even more difficult. Not only was the target they were searching for important, but the content of their conversation could not be known by a third party as well. This was because the content of their conversation included many trivial matters. The many years of gratitude and resentment, the separation and reunion, as well as many grievances and complaints. Each of them had their own bitterness, their own grievances, and both of them felt extremely tired. However, the most amazing and inexplicable thing was that both of them felt that their father was unfair, that his demands on them were too harsh and unreasonable. At the same time that this topic exploded, it was Marquis Yin who exploded first, throwing a tantrum. Both of them quarreled fiercely. Even when His Majesty was enraged and bellowed, Marquis Yin did not back down, arguing with him without backing down. It was a sight to behold. After the two of them finished quarreling, they were still panting with anger, but they went back to their own work. Then, at some unknown point, they began to discuss with each other, making sarcastic remarks. They found each other displeasing to the eye, and then they quarreled again. As they quarreled, His Majesty no longer addressed himself as emperor, addressing himself as "I'm your father." His demeanor was completely gone. Naturally, Marquis Yin was even more unwilling to be bullied. Initially, he was only limited to what he could do, but now that he heard that the Emperor of Yutong had lost his demeanor, he had no qualms and fought back with his "your father." How could he have known that he had fallen into His Majesty's trap? Poor Marquis Yin had been roaming the martial world for years. Although his cultivation base was high and rare in Yutong, cultivation base was not the same as scheming. Martial strength aside, how could he be the opponent of an old fox like the Emperor, who had spent his entire life in the imperial court, when it came to scheming? Marquis Yin's "your father" was said to his heart's content, but the Emperor's expression suddenly darkened. What did you say? Say it again. His Majesty's gaze was icy. Marquis Yin retorted angrily. What did your father say? Who do you think you are? His Majesty stood up and kicked him. How dare you call yourself "your father" with me? Whose father are you? Marquis Yin was stunned, covering his butt that had been kicked in exasperation. Didn't you call yourself "your father" too? Why didn't you say so? I can't call myself "your father," but you can. His Majesty chuckled and said, You're right. There's nothing wrong with me calling myself "your father." Don't you know the saying that an elder brother is like a father? I'm your elder brother, your biological elder brother. What's wrong with me calling myself "your father"? But you call yourself "your father" with me? Who are you? Who are you? Are you trying to turn the world upside down? Can't I stop you from doing anything? Try calling yourself "your father" in front of your father again. Let's see if your father dares to punish you. A lawless bastard who has no respect for his elders. Marquis Yin was speechless. He had suffered a great loss this time. Furthermore, he couldn't say anything wrong, and he didn't dare to retaliate at all. Aren't you very capable? Don't you have your own rules? Even in a commoner's home, an elder brother is like a father. Besides, I'm not only your elder brother, I'm also the Emperor. His Majesty's face was filled with rage as he charged forward to punch and kick. Every punch landed on flesh, his heart blooming with joy. He had finally found a chance to beat up this bastard, who lived a life 10,000 times more leisurely than he did. He dared not hit him usually, but if he did, he really could not defeat him. Moreover, his cultivation base had grown tremendously, and he was even boasting that he could not stop him from doing anything. If he did not seize this opportunity to vent his anger today, there might not be another chance for him to do so. Marquis Yin felt that the beating he had suffered was extremely unjust, and it seemed like he was being wronged. You You set me up on purpose. Marquis Yin suddenly understood. After all, he was born in the royal family. He had been exposed to the scheming of the emperor since he was young, and he was an intelligent man. Even if his scheming was not as good as the old statesman like the emperor, he was still quite capable. The emperor continued to beat him even harder. You fell into a trap just because I set you up? Are you that stupid? I'm giving you more knowledge. I'm giving you more experience in the martial world. I can't believe you've traveled all over the world. Say it yourself, you don't even have this little bit of scheming. What have you been doing all these years? Bang! 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 After a round of beating, His Majesty was thoroughly satisfied. Marquis Yin was grief-stricken, but he had been seized by His Majesty's weakness and ordered around by the Emperor for a long time. Go and check the pile over there. Move those out after you're done. Do I need to tell you that? Hurry up. Didn't you eat? This is such an important matter. How long are you going to take to find it if you're taking your time? You can do anything. You're not just talking, are you? During this period of time, Marquis Yin had the tempting thought of killing him with a single punch and usurping the throne for himself. He gritted his teeth, his face turning from white to green, from green to blue, and then completely black. In the end, it was even darker than the bottom of a wok. His Majesty, on the other hand, sat on the armchair with his legs crossed, sipping his tea as he gave his orders. It was only after a long while that he began to help again, probably guessing that Marquis Yin's patience had reached its limit. If he continued to press on, Marquis Yin would probably retaliate. Who was the Emperor of Yutong? He was a ruthless character with the most foresight and judgment. Naturally, he knew when to stop and when to stop. It was unknown when both of them had started talking about the same topic again. The immortal Da Huang who appeared out of nowhere earlier has an unusual background. I'm sure that I've seen the school he came from, especially the purpose of establishing the school. I even have an impression of it. The information was recorded in the royal archives, but I didn't pay much attention to it then. I always felt that the record was too illogical, so I put it aside after reading it. His Majesty frowned. Now that I think about it, the immortal Da Huang's sudden appearance at such a delicate time must have an unusual reason. Marquis Yin said, of all the things that have happened recently, none of them are ordinary. The fact that the 4 countries tore up the letter of credence of peace and attacked at the same time was already very unusual. Do you think it could be? Marquis Yin's words were spoken in a tone of doubt and uncertainty. However, His Majesty froze when he heard it. The credence of peace was not an ordinary contract between 2 countries. It was an oath witnessed by heaven. Who dared to tear it up? Tearing it up would be going against heaven's oath and would be punished by heaven. This time, however, the 4 countries had tore up this heaven's contract that no one, no force, and no country had ever dared to go against. Why? The only reason was that they were fearless. Why were they fearless? Why were they so fearless? Chapter 537. His Majesty sucked in a deep breath, his expression grim. Seize the time to look for bits and pieces of records in the books. I thought that this incident was still the 4 Seasons Tower's doing, and that the ultimate goal was to force the survivors of the 9 Supremes to show themselves and target them. But now it seems that my judgment was wrong. The target this time might not be the 9 Supremes, but Yutong itself. Marquis Yin was a smart man as well. Many thoughts popped into his head at once. Both of them were enlightened at the same time, and their search for the secret records sped up. Then Yin Yang. Are you sure he's not Supreme Cloud? His Majesty asked abruptly. The Emperor of Yutong was still worried about this matter. The topic had long passed, but it was now brought back, whether it was intentional or not. I'm sure he's not. He's really not. Marquis Yin said seriously. I'll use our father's name as a guarantee this time. I've checked carefully and confirmed that he's not Supreme Cloud. His Majesty was extremely disappointed. If that's the case, things will be troublesome. It's not easy to find a more definite suspect. The topic ended there. When Supreme Cloud brings my grandson here, I'll leave the child with you first, His Majesty said matter-of-factly. I initially planned to leave him with old Marshal Chiu, but old Chiu is unconscious now, and we don't know when he'll regain his consciousness. The original plan is inconvenient, so I'll leave him with you first. Your place is safe and stable enough anyway, especially convenient for the child to build his foundation. Marquis Yin opened his mouth and said, It's easy to leave him with me, but how do I announce his identity to the public? His Majesty looked at him strangely. Royal eldest grandson, the eldest prince's son, the direct descendant of the royal bloodline. Is there still a need to hide this? Marquis Yin was instantly enraged and cried out in grief. You Peza, how vicious you are! You didn't release a child for me. You released a volcano for me. I don't object to you letting him return to his ancestry. But what do you mean by leaving him with me after that? Aren't your sons going to use my Marquis' mansion as a battlefield? His Majesty's gaze was icy. That's exactly what I want to see. Marquis Yin was exasperated. King plotting against me like this. Was it also arranged by my father before he passed away? His Majesty looked at him meaningfully and said, You speak as if you can change the blood vessels in your body. Marquis Yin was infuriated, overwhelmed with grief and indignation. I'm the younger one, and should be taken care of. Why am I always cleaning up after you? How could there be such logic in this world? You said that an elder brother is like a father. Is this what you mean by an elder brother is like a father? His Majesty straightened up and said seriously, Yes, an elder brother is like a father. As a younger brother, shouldn't you be as filial to your elder brother as you are to your own father? This is the nature of human relationships. Marquis Yun's eyes bulged as he prostrated himself on the ground. Boss, an elder brother is like a father. How can human nature be explained this way? His Majesty guffawed and said seriously, Xiaoyao, this matter concerns the heritage of our bloodline and the greatness of the royal family. It also concerns the wish of our Yu family's ancestors. Brother, you must help me, he sighed and said. I wouldn't be at ease if I placed the child anywhere else. Only by placing him in your residence can I be at ease. There are many experts in your residence, it's safe. Just like you said, no one can stop you from doing anything in the whole of Yutong. Other than your residence, there's no safe place in the whole of Yutong. Even if the child were to be brought into the palace and placed by my side, I wouldn't be at ease. If that were to happen, the child might die in less than 3 days. Can you bear to see that happen? The child is my biological grandson, and also your grandnephew. Marquis Yun could not help falling silent. He had to admit that His Majesty was speaking the truth, a truth that he had to acknowledge as well. Even though he was the emperor who ruled over the world, and held the power of life and death in his hands, he still could not protect the child's safety even in his palace. Starting from this topic, the two brothers suddenly fell silent. Amidst the silence in the room, everyone could feel that a storm of blood was brewing bit by bit. At least 80% of the inevitable storm of blood would come from the bodies of the royals. I found it. Take a look and see if it's this. Marquis Yun grabbed a tattered animal skin book. Just by looking at the material of the book, one could tell that it was an item from many years ago. His Majesty moved his head closer to take a closer look. The School of Kismet State. Rumor has it that there's a mysterious school in the Tianxian continent that controls the rise and fall of the world. Almost every 1,000 years, its successor will appear and roam the martial world. After 10,000 years of training, a map of Kismet State has been accumulated. It protects the world and brings peace to the people. Tianxian is unified and recuperates. Kismet State rules the world. It controls the rise and fall of the world, its success and failure. It enforces justice on behalf of heaven, and chooses its master on behalf of heaven. It rules the world with a single thought. It commands the universe, and no one dares disobey. The executor of Kismet State is the top immortal of Tianxian. There were only a few hundred words recorded in the animal skin book. However, with just a few hundred words, His Majesty and Marquis Yun could understand the cause of the current change the moment they read it. Immortal Dahuang must be from the school of Kismet State. As for the mysterious person who had captured Immortal Dahuang, it was very likely that he was the executor of Kismet State. This person had also chosen Dongxian as the final winner of this world. This is it. His Majesty heaved a soft sigh of relief, his gaze gleaming with a chilling gleam. Marquis Yin was silent, but his will to fight was burning fiercely. The executor of Kismet State? If he was destined to stand against Yutong, even if he was the executor of Kismet State, there was no harm in fighting him. From today onwards, spread out your men to collect all the information related to the school of Kismet State. His Majesty said faintly, "We fight the world with our saber and spear. Why should we be stopped with just a word from others? Absolutely preposterous, absolutely preposterous. I vow to fight to the end, even if I die." Marquis Yin said faintly, "Worst comes to worst, it will be a life and death struggle. That's all." Both brothers chuckled as they looked at each other. The atmosphere was unprecedentedly harmonious. When our Yu family's old ancestor obtained Yutong, it wasn't by abdication, but by fighting his way through mountains of blades and oceans of fire. Perhaps our foundation is a little shallow, and we can't obtain the so-called legacy of the school of Kismet State. But there's no need to complain. Now, we still don't need the school of Kismet State's acknowledgement. They will never acknowledge it. If so, let's do it. It had been a busy night. His Majesty felt his head aching as well. His shoulders, neck, and waist were uncomfortable. However, when he saw Marquis Yin walk out, His Majesty felt incredibly relaxed and refreshed. At this moment, he truly felt that he had never felt so relaxed. There was also an indescribable joy in his mood. "This is what brothers are like," His Majesty murmured in delight. Last night, both brothers had been each other's trash cans, pouring out all the negative emotions in their hearts without hesitation. The feeling was exhilarating. "Luckily, I have you to accompany me in this world," His Majesty said emotionally. "Otherwise, I would really be alone." His Majesty's words were absolutely correct. These words and actions could only be said and done in front of Marquis Yin. Looking at the world today, he could not do it in front of anyone else other than Marquis Yin. Not even Qiu Jianhan, whom His Majesty regarded as his absolute confidant, and who was sometimes more important than a biological brother. Marquis Yin walked out of the palace with a smile on his face. Although he was about to face countless troubles that were bigger than the sky, he was in a good mood. Anyone could see it with a glance. He was also refreshed and elated. "I feel so good, old man, although the things you did weren't that great and were extremely unfair to me. But with him treating me like this, my life is enough. I need to apply for leave tomorrow. My eyes have been red and swollen for the past 7 to 8 days. There's a prickling feeling in the depths of my eye sockets after the recent surgery 2 days ago, like the feeling when my eyelashes pierced into my eyes previously. It's very uncomfortable. I'll go to the provincial hospital for a checkup tomorrow and get some medicine. I'm sorry, I haven't been updating in time, and the amount is not much. However, my body is like this. Even if I have the strength, I can't use it. I can only hope that I'll get better soon." Chapter 538. Marquis Yin, who had returned home in high spirits, widened his eyes at the door, uncertain. Is this really my home? Is this really the residence of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds? I don't recognize it anymore. Could it be that Upeza, that old fellow, had said to leave the child with me to be safe and secure, not because of me, but because it was convenient for him to lay down his foundation? Was it not because of me? Compared to his cheapskate father, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, who was refreshed and energetic, great young Master Yin Yang was completely drained. His body was literally hollowed out. Great young Master Yin had just returned from old Grand Commandant Feng's home. His exhaustion was, of course, due to treating the old Grand Commandant. Old Grand Commandant Feng's illness could be said to be quite severe. He could basically be said to be at the end of his rope. Previously, he had forcefully activated the exquisite Skyheart technique during the matter with Yang Buotao, causing his remaining vitality to be almost depleted. He was like a candle flickering in the wind, about to die at any time. Yin Yang went to the old Grand Commandant's home after he returned and stayed there for half a day and a night. He poured the endless divine art into the old Grand Commandant, exhausting his energy thrice. Only then did he manage to keep the old Grand Commandant on his last breath, temporarily saving the old Grand Commandant, who was already halfway to the gates of hell. Yes, he was temporarily out of danger. The old Grand Commandant's current situation was not very optimistic, but it was still within the norm to say that he was out of danger. With the old Grand Commandant's current state, it would not be a problem for him to struggle at death's door for half a year to a year. Compared to the old Grand Commandant's previous condition, it was a complete turnaround. It was an amazing sight to behold. Half a year later, Yun Yang felt that his deific consciousness space could be restored no matter what. During this period of time, Yun Yang truly missed his deific consciousness space, and the time when he had Emmy by his side. Humans only knew how to treasure things after losing them. If Emmy was by his side now, he could replenish the old Grand Commandant's vitality generously. There would be no need to tire himself out like a dead dog. Yun Yang dragged his footsteps that were as heavy as a mountain, moving back home step by step. Just as he arrived, he saw his cheapskate father, Marquis Yin, standing at the door like a puppet, looking like he did not recognize the house. "What is it?" Yun Yang asked tiredly. "Well, what is going on?" Marquis Yin was dumbfounded. "What do you mean, what happened?" Yun Yang felt that the other party's question was baffling and incomprehensible. It was simply incoherent and pointless. "I mean this house." Marquis Yun's eyes widened. I'll fix up this house." Yun Yang came to a sudden realization and said lightly, "The original residence of the Marquis was too small, too rundown, too substandard. It was completely unpresentable to entertain guests, and was even more inadequate. So, I made the decision to rebuild it." The corners of Marquis Yun's lips twitched. Too small, too shabby, too low class. Where did these words come from? Even if it was the Prime Minister's family, it probably wouldn't be as big as the original Marquis's mansion, right? It was not as luxurious as the inside. How could it be so low class? It's been so many years, and I didn't even realize it. Also, what do you mean by not being able to entertain the guests? Are you serious? How many people were you entertaining? It's not just repaired," Marquis Yin said. "It seems like I've even repaired the foundation of the house." Yun Yang remained unfazed as he said calmly, "Of course. Since it's been renovated, of course, it has to be fully renovated. A home has to be comfortable before it can be classy and classy. Having both at the same time, it's a classy home." Marquis Yin nodded. You're right. Both of them walked in together, and Marquis Yin said casually, "The Emperor told me just now that he wants a few people to stay in our house. Your renovation has solved a lot of problems, but we're still lacking hands and the place isn't very big." Yun Yang knew what was going on once he heard it, but he still put on an act and asked, "Who wants to stay in? Don't tell me that the Emperor has placed the people in our house to keep an eye on us men? Our current capabilities seem to have exceeded His Majesty's psychological endurance. It's not surprising that he would arrange for some people to keep an eye on us." Marquis Yin lowered his voice and said, "You're thinking too much. The person who's coming is the Emperor's eldest grandson. However, the reason he's coming to our house is indeed because he thinks highly of our formidable capabilities. We can provide more protection for the child." Yun Yang snorted, but he was worried in his heart. It was naturally possible to bring them here. But the problem now was that after bringing them here, it was inevitable that there would be too many eyes. Now that he had lost the ability to transform into wind and clouds and manifest various divine abilities, how could he quietly escape in front of everyone without leaving a trace? Both of them entered the Marquis residence side by side, and were immediately greeted with a bustling atmosphere. Dong Tianling, Chen Wanfeng, Xia Bingchuan, and Qiu Yunsan, the four popinjays, were each training their mystical beasts with their 6 guards. Dong Tianling did not have any mystical beasts. He was only patrolling the place with his men. His gaze was obviously filled with malice. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan, on the other hand, were watching from afar with black veils covering their faces, as if they were watching the show. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei, on the other hand, were sipping tea under the tree while the other was looking around with his arms behind his back. No one knew what they were looking for. These people. Marquis Yin was stunned. All of them are staying here? No wonder you said that the place isn't enough. If they do this every day, the place is indeed a little lacking. Yin Yang was stunned as well. He took 2 steps forward in exasperation and said, I say, the 4 of you stop it. The war is over, and there's nothing else to do. Why are the few of you still here? Boss, we've decided. The 4 young masters turned their heads at the same time, their expressions solemn. The few of us are not going home. We will stay here with you, and follow you to do something earth-shattering. We will write a legend, and create a legend. Yin Yang was stunned, unable to recover for a long time. Boss, what you told us the last time was truly profound and thought-provoking. We've remembered it all. After a difficult mental struggle, we've decided to stay and accompany boss all the way. Dong Tianling puffed out his chest and said vehemently, we won't be the family's parasites anymore. We want to have our own careers. Yin Yang's expression was strange. I see that all of you don't want to be the parasites of your families anymore, and have all come here to be parasites. Is that what you mean? Sai boss, how can you say that? Qiu Yunsan stepped forward and smiled. We're willing to be boss's right and left arms, to charge and break through the enemy lines, and be invincible. The brave are fearless. Not only are we obedient, we don't need to be paid either. We're very sensible. Dong Tianling said, even if boss is really short on cash, you can just tell your lackeys, and we'll go get the money right away. You can have as much as you want. Our skills aren't something the so-called experts in Tiantang City can compare to now. We can even call ourselves experts now. Xia Bingchuan shook his head. Most importantly, we've decided to stay here. Boss, you won't be able to chase us away, Chen Wanfeng said decisively. Marquis Yin, who was behind Yin Yang, was stunned for a long time before he chuckled. Then let's do it this way. I have no objections, it's pretty good. Before his words echoed in the air, he went back to his room to rest. The 4 of them were overjoyed when they heard him. With boss's father speaking up, was it not more plausible than having boss speak up himself? Yin Yang was stunned for a long time before he said, all right then, we'll stay. The 4 of them were overjoyed. What they did not know was that Yin Yang already had a plan in mind. It was great that these 4 fellows were staying. There would be many things to do in the future that he would not be able to handle alone. Now that he had all the manifestation powers, it was inconvenient for the 9 Supremes to be mobilized. With these fellows here to help, not only could he divert his attention, it would also be convenient to use them, especially when he could sometimes use the name of the 4 noble families to stir up some trouble. Of course, the 4 of them had a truth that matched the current situation. Their actual combat power was rather impressive. At least to the current Tiantang City, they were true experts. I'm going to sleep first. Yin Yang waved his hands, extremely tired. I'm really dead tired now. Do as you wish. Marquis Yun's lips curled into a smile as he listened to the conversation outside. What an adorable bunch of young people they were. Suddenly, he was alerted and stood up abruptly. Something was not right. Marquis Yun suddenly realized that he seemed to have forgotten something important. He smacked his head. *T. Marquis Yun finally remembered that he had forgotten to give His Majesty the Emperor the money he had prepared. Here came the problem. Where was the money? Marquis Yun dashed out to look for Yin Yang immediately. Only this fellow would know where the money was. However, after a few rounds, he realized that he could not find Yin Yang, even though he was in his own house. What was the reason? Did he not say that he had gone to sleep? Lao Mei, where's Yin Yang? Marquis Yun asked. Lao Mei looked troubled. I don't know where he's gone. Marquis Yun's eyes widened, feeling incredulous. Lao Mei had said that he did not know where Yin Yang had gone. How could this be possible? Your elder brother is the major domo of the residence of Yin. Old master asked where young master had gone, and you just said you didn't know? This was impossible. Yet he had said so. There was only one explanation. He did not want to tell Marquis Yun. However, this was even more incomprehensible. Lao Mei was Marquis Yin Yang's confidant. He knew very well, or rather, he was the one who knew his relationship with Yin Yang the best. There was only one explanation. You've betrayed us? Marquis Yin asked Lao Mei in disbelief. Lao Mei was exasperated. Old master, can you be any more melodramatic? How did I betray you? Did your teacher teach you to use words like this? I didn't betray you. It's just that young master's identity is too important. I can't tell you. Besides, I can't leak any information. Lao Mei really wanted to defend himself. However, after some thought, he lowered his head and said, I didn't betray you. It's just that young master has a bad temper when he's sleeping. If we disturb him, it won't end well for anyone. Marquis Yun's eyes were wide open, confused. What did he say? I'm still his father in name, am I not? Can't I even disturb his sleep? How big of a deal is this? I haven't slept for a day and a night, okay? How could he be more tired than I am? Looking at Lao Mei's constipated expression, Marquis Yun did not pursue the matter. The next day, His Majesty the Emperor gave his orders. All the officials' residences around the residence of Yin were either promoted or demoted. Their properties were confiscated. Those who were promoted were ordered to move away. Those who were demoted were ordered to move. Those who were demoted were ordered to move. Those who were dismissed were sent back to their original homes. Those whose properties were confiscated, needless to say, they were taken back to the country. A few other wealthy families were ordered to move as well. Almost within a morning, the 17 residences around the residence of Yun were emptied. Marquis Yun then wrote, The residence of Marquis is too small, too simple, not enough to sustain a living. With a wave of His Majesty's brush, all the residences around the residence belonged to Marquis Yin. At the same time, the royal edict was delivered. Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yin Xiaoyao, had contributed to the nation and the border, and was rewarded. Yin Xiaoyao was specially conferred the title of King Xiaorao of Yutong, equal to a king. The entire nation was shaken. At the same time, the royal edict stated that the original title of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds would be succeeded by Marquis Yun's only son, Yun Yang. In other words, from now on, Yun Yang's title in Yutong would be Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. It was unprecedented in Yutong's history that Yin Xiaoyao would be conferred the title of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. As for Yun Yang, a commoner, being conferred the title of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, it was also unprecedented. However, Yutong's civil and military officials did not object to this. This was because everyone knew that Marquis of Heavenly Clouds was actually the illegitimate son of Yutong's previous emperor. This was a secret to the common people, but to those in the official circles, it was crystal clear. Who would dare stop His Majesty the Emperor from conferring the title of his own brother? Would that not be seeking death? During the morning assembly, Marquis Yun accepted the imperial edict to express his gratitude. He was moved to the point of tears. This official shall dedicate my life to the imperial court. In addition, this official is prepared to donate all the wealth I've earned in this life of traveling the martial world to the imperial court to solve its urgent needs. His Majesty the Emperor had thought that this would be the end of the matter. However, when Marquis Yun suddenly proposed to donate, he was taken aback and said with a smile, Marquis Yun is a rich man. I wonder how much have you plundered in Jianghu all these years? When the civil and military officials heard this, they immediately lowered their heads and didn't say anything. How much have I plundered? And how much have I plundered were two different things. One was illegal while the other was permissible. There was the word permissible. His Majesty the Emperor had given his permission. Who dared to say no? Marquis Yun said humbly, It's just a small amount of property, hardly worthy of the Grand Hall. His Majesty picked up a cup of tea leisurely and took a sip. He said with a smile, King Yun, you don't have to donate all of it. Half will suffice. Yun Xiaoyao said, This official has earned a total of 127,890,000 silver taels. I'm willing to donate all of it to the imperial court to fill the national treasury. Puffed. His Majesty the Emperor spat out a mouthful of tea and coughed, his face flushed. Puff, puff, puff. The eyes of the civil and military officials almost popped out of their sockets. How much? My ears aren't damaged, are they? 127,890,000 silver taels? How did Marquis Yun get so much money? His Majesty coughed until he was almost out of breath. Suddenly he slammed the table. Yin Xiaoyao, where did you get so much money? Marquis Yun replied respectfully, Your Majesty, this is what this official has earned through hard work. It's only been this small amount all these years. Your Majesty need not ask further. There are some things that cannot be brought to light. The officials lowered their heads and snickered. Amassing a total of 120 million silver taels in these few years was not just any ordinary shady business. If it had been through the proper channels, the national treasury would not have been able to collect so much money. However, His Majesty the Emperor seemed to understand immediately. If so, I won't ask further. Someone, bring all of Marquis Yun's donations into the national treasury. Everyone was happy. Bringing it into the palace treasury and the national treasury were two completely different things. Bringing it into the national treasury was for the royal family's use. Bringing it into the national treasury was for the Ministry of Revenue. In other words, everyone could spend it. Therefore, His Majesty the Emperor was overjoyed, and so were the officials. Finally, they did not lack money to do anything. At the same time, the newly appointed Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Lord Yunyang, had arrived at the small village surrounded by mountains. The first to receive him was Whitey 4. Its snow-white body rushed into his embrace like a bolt of lightning. Yunyang hugged Whitey 4, overwhelmed with emotions. Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 were still in his deific consciousness and could not be seen. Now, then Bauer appeared. "Uncle!" The childish cry made Yunyang forget everything else. "Sisterly," Yunyang said. "I'm here to bring you back." Liangqiu was pleasantly surprised. "Thank you, young master." Yunyang had come in the same attire as the last time, but what troubled him was that he had not concealed his original appearance the last time he had come. He had not thought much of it back then. Fortunately, there were only 4 to 5 people who had seen him, including Liangqiu. Yunyang gathered these people and entrusted them to him solemnly. "Go to the residence of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. Imperial eldest grandson, His Majesty. Due to my unique identity, I can't. So, if you see me in the future, you must pretend not to know me. Otherwise, the consequences will be dire. Everyone's lives will be in danger. All 48 households shall move together. From now on, you are Bauer's direct force." Regarding Yunyang's words, the 2 leading villagers gathered a few people for a discussion. "No one is to leak this. If this young master wants to keep it a secret, he could totally kill us all, but young master didn't do so. So, for the young master's safety, for our benefactor's safety." Thereafter, the 48 families of hunters in the village held a secret meeting as well. No secrets are to be leaked no matter what. Not a single word related to this place is to be leaked. Yunyang made arrangements. "Tomorrow morning, I'll bring all of you to the south gate of Tiantang City. I'll leave and someone will come to receive you. Everyone will still stay together, but confidentiality and safety," Yunyang exhorted. These people were the backbone of the military back then. Some of them were Supreme Earth and Supreme Water's confidants. Although not all of them were knowledgeable, they had something in common. They had long been indifferent to life and death. Everyone understood these principles. Yunyang knew very well that even if he did not say a word, these people would still know what to do when the time came. Still, he instructed them one by one. On the same night, the entire village was mobilized. Then, all of the houses in the small mountain village were not damaged by anyone. Just like that, they quietly remained in the middle of the vast mountains. The 2 leaders had planned to demolish them and burn them down. However, Yunyang did not agree. "Keep them. Destroy all the paths in the outside world. If anything happens in the future, this place will still be the last safe place. It's best if we don't use this escape route. But if we do, it must be foolproof." Everyone was convinced of Yunyang's plan. On the morning of the 4th day, Yunyang brought his men to the outskirts of Tiantang City. After settling down, Yunyang looked around to make sure that nothing was amiss. He then left immediately. It was in the afternoon of the same day. Old Marshal Chio's residence suddenly received a secret letter. "He has arrived at the south gate. Welcome him quickly." Old Marshal Chio was unconscious, but old Mistress Chio had no idea what was going on. What was going on? However, there was the 9 Supremes mark on it. Old Mistress Chio dared not make the decision on her own, nor discuss it with anyone else. She could only get someone to inform His Majesty that old Marshal Chio's residence had something important to discuss. His Majesty was agitated when he heard the news. He actually came immediately. Marquis Yin was summoned as well. Then everything fell into place. Marquis Yin personally brought Feng Mafei, by Ishiwe, and a few guards of the four noble young masters out of the south gate to welcome Bauer and his entourage. It was already night when they arrived at the residence of Yin. That night, the residence of Yin held a grand banquet. In the name of celebrating Marquis Yin's victorious return, the lights were brightly lit and delicacies were served like flowing water. His Majesty had come to celebrate and participate in the banquet. Everyone knew that Marquis Yin was His Majesty's half-brother. But it was not surprising. Bauer, His Majesty carried the little child, looking at the features that resembled the eldest prince's, and hugged him tightly in his embrace, tears rolling down his cheeks. Chapter 539. He did not want to apply for annual leave so early, but he had no choice. He went to the provincial hospital for a checkup yesterday. At the bottom of his eyelids, there was a layer of small bulging spots similar to granulation. It was very small, but there were many. Only his right eye had them, not his left eye. But his left eye and right eye were both red. It was especially obvious during the surgery. He was scolded by the doctor. After the surgery, the removed part was prone to lesions. Long-term exposure to computer radiation increased eye fatigue. Now there was inflammation similar to macular lesions. This disease could easily cause keratitis and keratopathy. I'm scared. He took a lot of anti-inflammatory medicine and 4 big bottles of eye drops. 8 drops a day, 8 times. He lay flat on both eyes. He could not close his eyes. According to the doctor, 2 drops for each eye at a time. After applying the eye drops, he did not blink. He had to keep his eyes open until tears came out. He wanted to apply for leave. But it was not right to apply for leave without updating. So since last night, he thought about all the trivial plots during this period of time. He squinted his eyes and lay next to him. He dictated and let his wife type. After finishing this chapter, then he applied for annual leave from everyone. At the same time, he would take care of his eyes during the annual leave. To be honest, he did not want to apply for leave. Previously, he had pretended to be pitiful, acted cute, and lied to apply for leave for himself. But he knew that the readers would not care, and he would not lose anything. The more he applied for leave, the more it would affect him. He would only harm others and himself. But this time, he really had no choice. He estimated that he would have to use the eye drops until the 10th of the first month. He would have to take the internal medicine until the 7th of the first month. If there were no accidents. On the 8th of the first month, he would resume normal updates. After writing for so many years, he had never applied for leave that made him feel so conflicted and uncomfortable. It was true. In the past, when he applied for leave, he could at least relax for a few days. But this time, he regretted it. After the surgery, he should have rested for at least 10 days. But he could not help it and kept updating. He thought that he was very diligent and that he could not let down the brothers who were chasing after him. He always thought that his persistence in updating was the greatest respect for everyone. But now he regretted it. Because of his eagerness to update, his eyes could not recover. Perhaps that was the greatest harm to both of us. I won't say anything else. Please forgive me. Happy Chinese New Year to everyone in advance. Chapter 540. However, Bauer's return had stirred up a tsunami in the empire of Yutong. In fact, just by looking at the tears that had rolled down the emperor's cheeks when he heard the news that afternoon, and his undisguised love for Bauer, it was obvious that this child's background was extraordinary, and that he held a high position in His Majesty's heart. Perhaps, he had reached a height that no one else could reach. Everyone who had witnessed it felt their hearts churning. On the morning of the next day, reality proved everyone's thoughts right. His Majesty had brought Bauer to the morning assembly for the first time ever. Holding Bauer's hand, he announced to the court officials with a flushed face, "This is my eldest royal grandson, the son of the eldest prince, Yu Wuxia Yu Qianquan. His nickname is Bauer." Boom. It was like a bomb had been dropped into the court. Even though they had some guesses and some expectations, All the civil and military officials still looked at each other in shock. After all, the news was too explosive and shocking. It was enough to shake the entire empire of Yutong. The crown prince's face lost all its color on the spot. With a swoosh, his face turned pale, and his whole body stiffened. "Father!" The crown prince's voice was heart-wrenching. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were shocked. His voice was too loud. Not even in his wildest dreams would the crown prince have thought that he would speak so loudly to his father one day. The matter of a royal brother's son concerns the royal bloodline. "Father, please be careful. Father, please be careful with your words." The crown prince was trembling. As he spoke, a glint of madness flashed in his lowered eyes. He knew all too well what the appearance of this so-called eldest brother's orphan, Yu Qingquan, meant to him. It meant that the throne that he was so close to attaining was no longer as secure as before. Furthermore, from the moment this Yu Qingquan appeared, his father had already taken away the right to inherit the throne from the crown prince's heart. This was a disaster. Initially, when the four countries besieged Yutong, Yutong was besieged by external threats and faced the imminent threat of extinction. The entire nation was united in their resolve to defend against the external threat. However, as Dongshuan's Han Sanha invaded and even broke through the eastern border, the fortress of resilience, the situation took a turn for the worse. The crown prince had secretly gathered his advisors to plan to cede land and negotiate for peace. As long as Yutong did not really fall, he could still ascend the throne. Even if he had to cede a lot of land, it would still be advantageous. However, with the reappearance of the 9 Supremes and the reversal of the war, they had dealt a heavy blow to Dongxian, and even forced Han Sanha to his death. The siege of the four empires had been broken and Yutong's external threat had been averted. His Highness the Crown Prince was overjoyed. After this war, all four empires had been severely injured and would need at least 8 to 10 years to recuperate. Yutong's greatest enemy, Dongxian, would not be able to recover without at least 20 to 30 years. Such a situation was exactly what His Highness the Crown Prince was most pleased to see. His Highness knew himself best. He knew how capable he was. His Highness was well aware of his standard. Opening up new territories and expanding territories was not something he could do. But if there were no external threats, and he could only defend himself, he could still do it. Was this not the current situation? Not only were the four empires heavily injured, Yutong itself had suffered great losses, and needed a ruler like him to defend himself. But now, everything was clearly under his control, and he was only left with the final step of inheriting the throne. But now, another wave had arisen, and it was such a huge wave that it was enough to drown him completely and crush him into pieces. "Be careful with your words." The emperor smirked coldly and said faintly, "This concerns the royal bloodline. I will, of course, be careful with my words and actions. Crown Prince, what do you really want to say? Is it the throne or the royal bloodline?" His Majesty's words were a little harsh. Moreover, it was a direct rebuke, leaving no leeway at all. The Crown Prince was trembling. The royal bloodline is not a child's game. There is no room for doubt. It could not be helped. This was the only way the Crown Prince could think of to deny the child's identity. He could only go all the way. His Majesty was enraged, his palms slamming on the armrest. "So it's a child's game that I want to acknowledge my grandson? My own grandson, the eldest grandson of the emperor. A child's game? Do you think I'm a child's game?" His cold gaze slid past the Crown Prince's face and slowly turned to the civil and military officials. His voice was cold as he said, "I wonder who else thinks I'm a child's game?" His Majesty's wrath was about to spill out at this very moment. This oppressive feeling caused all the civil and military officials in the imperial court to almost be unable to breathe. However, everyone knew what this meant. It meant the throne. It was not just significant, it was extremely significant. The current matter concerned their stance. Those officials who were close to the Crown Prince could not help but speak, even though they knew that they would be offending the heavens if they spoke up now. After all, once the matter was settled, the Crown Prince would lose his power. Not only would their previous allegiance and investment go down the drain, the aftermath would be unbearable as well. His Highness the Crown Prince is right. Your Majesty, please be careful. The royal bloodline cannot be taken lightly. A total of 20 to 30 officials knelt down at the same time. An official with white hair and beard trembled as he stood up. The moment he opened his mouth, tears streamed down his face. Your Majesty, please calm down for a moment. Things will not be made clear if we do not speak reason. The current situation is just as the Crown Prince has said. We cannot afford to be careless. The authenticity of the royal bloodline also involves the ownership of the throne. This child cough. This official has never heard of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince leaving behind a bloodline. Now such a child has suddenly appeared. This old official thinks, Your Majesty should be more cautious in your actions. Before his words echoed in the air, the old official knelt down. Your Majesty, this concerns the future of Yutong. Your Majesty must be cautious. As the old official knelt in the dust, no less than 40 to 50 other officials stood up one after another and knelt on the ground in unison. Your Majesty, this matter concerns the country and the succession of the throne. Please reconsider. The emperor's gaze was as sharp as a hawk's. Looking at the officials who had stepped out to kneel down, his gaze was icy as he said, Officials who have stepped out, do all of you think that what I am doing is very inappropriate? The people who were out of class were all experienced people. How could they not hear the coldness and threat in His Majesty's voice? Everyone's heart could not help but tremble. They all knew that once they gave an affirmative answer, it was equivalent to completely offending His Majesty. However, they were already riding on a tiger's back. It was difficult to escape. Moreover, as the saying goes, the law does not punish the masses. Currently, there were around 70 to 80 ministers who came out to admonish the emperor at the same time. Even His Majesty the Emperor had to be cautious. He couldn't denounce such a large group of ministers, especially when the situation had just stabilized. Your Majesty, please think twice. The officials spoke in unison, their voices loud and clear. Good, good, good. The emperor shouted 3 times, each louder than the last. He said coldly, You are all my good officials. My good crown prince. You are truly dedicated to the country and have no other thoughts. You are courageous and loyal, and you advise us bluntly. Truly good. Many of the officials could not help but blush when they heard the emperor. What about you? What do you think? The emperor looked at the other officials who did not speak and said calmly, Why are you not saying anything? Do you also think that what I am doing is inappropriate? Wu Lai, the Minister of Justice, stepped out and said, I have no opinion on what Your Majesty has done. What Your Majesty has said is indeed a matter of the royal family, but it is also a family matter to Your Majesty. It is just a reunion between grandfather and grandson. Just this point alone, I do not have the right to say anything. Moreover, to say something disrespectful, Your Majesty has recognized this grandson, but I do not feel anything towards it. On the other hand, if Your Majesty does not recognize this grandson, it does not matter to me. At this point, the emperor had already squinted his eyes in satisfaction. However, this stern and upright official obviously felt that he had not said enough. He actually continued, I am just an official. I am just doing my duty and doing my job well. As for other matters, there is no need to worry too much. Speaking of this, I would like to ask these officials, why are you so interested in Your Majesty's family matters? The country is in danger at every turn, and you casually talk about the royal bloodline. Forgive me for my ignorance, but I really do not understand what you are thinking. Is it really that serious? Chapter 541. First of all, I wish everyone a happy new year. Everyone must have had a good time during the spring festival. However, my new year was quite bleak. The first problem was my eyes. The hospital diagnosed it as pterygium, 5 to 6 pterygium. This was the first time I heard of this pterygium. The doctor didn't even know how to write it. In the diagnosis he wrote slave meat. It was a pity that I thought I was a cultured person, but I couldn't figure out what it meant. After asking another doctor to explain it to me, I finally understood. Then I looked it up on the internet and found out. It was temporarily under control, and it didn't feel awkward anymore. However, the eye drops still had to be dripped, and the medicine still had to be taken. The doctor's answer was, "This thing doesn't matter. As long as it doesn't grow bigger, there's no need to care about it. Also, it's getting rid of it quite well. It's slowly shrinking, but everything needs to be paid attention to. Therefore, I didn't drink a single drop during the spring festival. Moreover, I caught a cold on the second day of the Lunar New Year. Until today, my nose couldn't smell anything. I didn't have a fever, no headache, no discomfort. I just felt dizzy and weak. My nose was stuffed, and I couldn't smell anything. When my wife was frying salted fish, I leaned forward to smell it, but I actually couldn't smell it. I was drunk. If I was on the bus and someone farted, and everyone else covered their noses, wouldn't I be the one enjoying it? Damn it, that's all. In the future, I'll try to write in the afternoon and update at night. I'll try to keep updating normally. When I'm in a good condition, I'll break out. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for your understanding. Actually, I'm also quite speechless. So many things happened this year. But my brother said, "Bro, how old are you? If your body doesn't have any problems now, do you still have to wait until you're 80? I spat on him on the spot. Chapter 542. The Crown Prince made up his mind. This child's identity was naturally real, but even if he was beaten to death, he could not admit this matter, especially not from his own mouth. Once he admitted it, he would be handing over the throne that was within his grasp. But there is no point in denying it. For so many days, Imperial Father has always missed Imperial Brother. He has always felt that he owed Imperial Brother. Under such a mentality, the appearance of this child has naturally aroused Imperial Father's desire to make up for it. He will give everything that Imperial Brother should have received to this child. This naturally includes the position of Crown Prince and the throne. In front of Imperial Father's attitude, I have no chance of winning at all. No matter how hard I try, it will all be in vain. The Crown Prince paced back and forth in the Crown Prince's mansion with a gloomy expression. Then, there is only one way to go. Only when this child dies, can I take back everything that belongs to me. Only then will Father have no other choice, just like before. The Crown Prince's thoughts were very clear. Moreover, it was very stubborn and determined. In fact, from the moment that child appeared in the Golden Hall, he had been thinking about this problem. He had even tried all sorts of methods that could and could not be used in his mind. This Yuqianquan must die. Anyone who stands in the way of the throne must die. The Crown Prince gritted his teeth. He had a bright and handsome face that was inherited from the Yu bloodline. Under the bright yellow robe that symbolized royal status, his eyes were unusually dark and vicious. Although there was a small voice in his heart that tried to stop him. You can't do this. That's your big brother's only bloodline. Your own nephew. You can't fight with your own family. You can't kill each other. However, another ferocious voice burst out like a flash flood, easily shattering the barrier into pieces. What big brother's only bloodline? In front of the throne. All of this is not important. Even the relationship between father and son. Not to mention the bloodline of Big Brother. The path of the throne is indisputable. As long as I ascend to the throne, I can have anything I want. The whole world will be mine, and everything will be within my reach. But if I fall from the position of Crown Prince, I will have no future to speak of. A fallen phoenix was inferior to a chicken. A Crown Prince who could not ascend the throne was even worse than a commoner. A banished Crown Prince is at the bottom of the entire country. This was the heartfelt sigh of a Crown Prince of the previous dynasty, who had been stripped of his position because of a mistake he made. Every time the Crown Prince thought of this sentence, his body would tremble in empathy. The next step is to rule the world. If you take half a step back, it will be a bottomless abyss, and there will be no tomorrow. What choice do I have? What choice do I have? With a gloomy face, the Crown Prince walked into his study room with his hands behind his back, leaving behind a deep voice. Summon Mr. 1, Mr. E and Mr. Gu for a meeting. Similarly, when the other princes heard about this matter, their faces all darkened without exception. The third prince and the fourth prince's expressions were even worse than the Crown Prince's. Meeting. Gathering people at this time, even if it was a secret, would definitely attract attention. However, the princes were already panicking. The fifth prince made his move at once, visiting the residence of Lung Daoyin. The sixth prince, under the guidance of his imperial concubine, went to old Marshal Qiu Jianhan's house to ask about his well-being. After the morning assembly, His Majesty returned to the palace leisurely and went to the royal study. Along the way, there was a hint of a smile hanging on the corners of his lips, his demeanor carefree, but the faint lines on his face were indescribably cold. In the royal study, His Majesty looked at the portrait of his deceased eldest son and said softly, "My son, I don't know if this decision is right or wrong, but I have to do this now. If your younger brothers don't make a move and compete fairly with their own means, I will choose to give them a chance and treat them equally. The final heir to the throne will be decided by then. The throne might not fall into Bao Er's hands. This is the fate and sorrow of the royal descendants. I have sacrificed you back then, and I still need to use Bao Er now. I have let you down, father and son. But if they choose to make a move," His Majesty murmured to himself, a chilling glint shooting from his eyes, "I will be heartbroken. Do you understand?" In the portrait, the eldest prince stood facing the wind as usual, but there seemed to be 1,000 thoughts drifting in his eyes. There was actually a hint of worry as he looked at his father. It was as if he had seen something that should not have happened. The most ruthless imperial family has always been since the beginning of time. His Majesty closed his eyes and murmured, "Will our family be an exception? Let's hope so." Yin Xiaoyao received Bao Er under the curious gazes of the crowd and headed towards the residence of Yin unhurriedly. It was the same as when he was at his most leisurely. There was not the slightest change. In fact, Yin Xiaoyao's heart was as calm as still water, without the slightest ripple. The officials' suspicions and opinions, the crown prince's, and the prince's thoughts were meaningless to Yin Xiaoyao. Yin Xiaoyao's thoughts were different from Yin Yang's and the emperor's. In fact, whether it was the eldest prince, the crown prince or the other princes, he had no more feelings for them. No matter who succeeded the throne in the end, it did not matter. The only thing that mattered was who his royal brother wanted to succeed the throne. This was the focus of Yin Xiaoyao's attention. Of course, it would be even better if Yutong's next monarch was talented and wise. After all, he did not want to serve a venomous villain or a cowardly and conservative emperor. Therefore, on the way back, he would occasionally glance at Bao Er, who was beside him, and could not hide the panic on his face. He murmured in his heart, "Is it him?" Yin Yang was currently in the residence of Yin, sitting alone in his study. His face was filled with a bitter smile and helplessness as he contemplated the current situation. What Yin Yang needed to solve the most right now was none other than the issue of his true identity. The crux of this problem, or rather the crux of it all, was Bao Er. Adults could control their words and actions to a great extent to avoid the possibility of being exposed, but children did not possess such an ability. How could they hide their impending first meeting? His cheapskate father, Marquis Yin, was a sly old fox. He would definitely find clues in this meeting. As long as there was a sizable flaw, it would not be difficult to uncover the secret that he desperately wanted to hide. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly, but he could do nothing about it. He realized that there was no room for him to hide anymore. He could only face it head-on. Actually, Lao Mei's attitude towards him was already a sizable flaw. It was only because Marquis Yin could be sure that Yin Yang bore no ill will towards Yutong and the Yu royal family, that he had turned a blind eye to it. Now, all he had done was reveal the truth. Was that it? Just as he was thinking, deliberating, and consoling himself, he heard an expected voice from the door. "His Highness has returned." Chapter 543. Once Yin Yang stepped out, he saw Yin Xiaoyao, who was holding Bao Er's hand, walking slowly to the entrance of the courtyard he was in. The moment Bao Er's gaze met Yin Yang's, his eyes brightened. He was like a bullied child who had just seen his long-lost relative. He was about to call him uncle. In the imperial court, Bao Er had experienced the biggest shock of his life so far. The gazes of so many people who were looking at him were like wild beasts in the mountains, eager to devour him. He was surrounded by unfamiliar people. Even his grandfather, the emperor, could not give him much sense of security. The only one who could make Bauer feel safe was this uncle. Now he had finally met him again. At this moment, Bauer almost wanted to cry in the heart of the little child. Seeing Bauer again, Yun Yang's face was full of smiles. Come, let it be exposed, it doesn't matter. The 9 Supremes, is there anything that I can't face? Since things have come to this and I can't avoid it, I'll face it head on. Come. Cough. Yun Xiaoyao coughed heavily, his gaze sweeping over his cheapskate son. The cough was loud, causing Bauer's small frame to tremble. His body that was about to pounce froze as he involuntarily turned to look at Yun Xiaorao. Yun Yang followed the sound as well, unable to understand why someone was coughing at such a crucial moment. Yun Yang, this is Bauer, His Majesty the Emperor's eldest grandson, a direct descendant of the royal bloodline, a respectable status. His Majesty the Emperor has allowed him to stay in the residence of Yun for the time being. I've agreed to it. Yun Yang nodded calmly. And then, despite Yun Yang's calm demeanor, he was actually rather confused. He pondered over what Marquis Yun meant by this. What was the deeper meaning behind it? Or what was he trying to do? This had already been said once, had it not? Then it's about the follow-up of taking care of His Highness the Emperor's eldest grandson. It's just that I'm getting on in years, and my energy has been greatly depleted from the previous battles. Comforting a child like this is the most exhausting. I definitely can't do it. So from today onwards, Bauer will stay here with you. You will be responsible for teaching him. However, I'm warning you, this child has a respectable status, and will be of great use in the future. Even if you're his uncle in name, you can't neglect him in the slightest. If you really lead him astray, no one will be able to protect you. I'm telling you this first, you must be aware of it. Yun Xiaoyao continued to speak with a solemn expression, full of a condescending attitude. Yun Yang, on the other hand, widened his eyes. Just as he was about to say something, he heard Yun Xiaoyao continue speaking quickly. Let me say it again. This child's identity is truly honorable. No mishap is allowed to happen to him. We can't afford even the slightest mishap. Do you understand? Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath and said, I understand. What then? Marquis Yun looked at him meaningfully and said, Since you understand, that's great. Then it's all up to you. He then turned to Bauer and said kindly, Bauer, this is my son, your uncle Yun Yang. Isn't he handsome? Very pleasing to the eye, right? He takes after me in this. Bauer blinked and said childishly, Yes, Uncle Yin is really handsome, really good-looking. Obviously, the little fellow had quickly calmed himself down after the initial excitement, and recalled his aunt's reminder. You will stay with Uncle Yin from now on. You must listen to Uncle Yin, understand? Yun Xiaoyao instructed gently. All right. Bauer nodded obediently. He could not have been more obedient. The residence of Yin had already occupied a large area, but after the renovation and annexation, it had more than doubled in size. Beside it was a residence of Yun's courtyard. Li Yingqiu and the rest were staying in this residence of Yun's courtyard. This courtyard and Yun Yang's small courtyard were only separated by a wall. Yun Yang had even opened a small door for them to interact with each other. Beyond that was the residence of the 4 noble young masters. There were also the guest rooms opposite Yun Yang's, where the 2 ladies who gave Yun Yang a headache now resided, Jilingxi and Yu Rulan. That was the current distribution of the residence of Yun's members. That night, Marquis Yun's study was lit by a lone lamp. As his sleeves fluttered, Yun Yang, who was dressed in purple, quietly appeared in the study. Marquis Yun, who was reading in the study, lifted his head slowly to look at him. A hint of a smile flashed across his eyes. He seemed to have been waiting for someone's arrival, but he did not speak. Both of them stared at each other in silence, not saying a single word. After a while, Yun Yang smiled and walked out, pushing the door open. He had come without a sound and left without a reason. He did not say anything, nor did he do anything. Marquis Yun smiled as well before he shook his head and sighed. How great would it be if you were really my son? He stood up and looked at the night sky outside the window. What I can do for you is, that's all. Although you've never treated me as your real father, I've long treated you as my real son. My only son. That's why I haven't gotten married all these years. Actually, in these few years, How could the will of that old man really bind me? Marquis Yin chuckled bitterly and shook his head lightly. Bauer adapted to the environment very quickly, far exceeding Yin Yang's expectations. Other than the initial restraint, it only took him less than half a day to let loose and chase, after the whiteys everywhere to play. Throughout this half a day, Yin Yang had been watching the child's every move with a smile. His heart was filled with an indescribable, subtle feeling. If it was possible, Yin Yang hoped that Bauer could enjoy such carefree days for a long time. However, it was undoubtedly an extravagant hope. Such days might only last for a few days. After these few days, what followed would be endless conspiracies, traps and calculations, endless learning content, endless dangers of the human world, everything. All the dark sides of the human world would gather here, one after another, and it would never end. Uncle, that person, is he really my grandfather? He said that I'm the royal eldest grandson. What is a royal eldest grandson? So many books. Are they all for me to read? It's too scary. How can I finish reading all of them? Yin Yang smiled and answered each and every one of them patiently. There was not the slightest hint of irritation, as if he was enjoying the process. It was such an emotion that infected Bauer, easing the child's childlike heart that was filled with doubts. Bauer, from today onwards. Yin Yang pressed his hands on Bauer's tender shoulders and said word by word, "You're no longer a child. You're a man. Do you understand?" Yin Yang had used the art of divine melody empowerment for these few words. The entire backyard was suddenly enveloped in a solemn atmosphere. You're no longer a child, you're a man. These words were like a soul imprint, deeply wedged into Bauer's mind. The imprint was indelible and irreplaceable, as if he was born with it. Without any preparation, Yin Yang had written a thick and colorful stroke in Bauer's mind. A man. Who would have known that these 3 words would accompany a man's entire life? From a naive youth to an old man, no matter which man's struggle, it was all for these 3 words. Bauer's young face was solemn, as if he was deep in thought. After some thought, he said cautiously, "Thank you, uncle. Bauer understands." Yin Yang nodded. He was comforted by Bauer's reaction, but more than that, he felt heartache. If he had a choice, Yin Yang really did not want to do so. After going through the heaven melody empowerment, Bauer would indeed be much more obedient and mature from now on. It would be very beneficial for him to prepare his cornerstone in advance, when he would be of great use in the future. However, with the use of the divine melody empowerment this time, it also meant that Bauer's childhood fun would be completely cut off from today onwards. From tonight onwards, what would appear would only be a mature youth, a child who had begun to rack his brains and think seriously about all sorts of things at a young age. Such a child only needed a little guidance, allowing him to stride forward on the path that he wished him to take. Then, everything would be twice the result with half the effort. Perhaps, twice the result with half the effort would not be enough to describe it. This was because he would definitely do what he approved of, persevere in doing it, and see it through to the end. This was equivalent to molding a completely mature personality from the age of 3. However, this was not a situation that Yin Yang was happy to see. It was an indescribable regret that his eldest brother and 4th sister's only son could not retain the innocence and joy of a childhood. "I'm sorry, child." Yin Yang caressed Bauer's head and said in a low voice, "I hope you won't blame uncle in the future." The update arrived today. It had been more than a month since he last drank. Chapter 544. With Bauer's innocent personality, it was difficult to ensure his safety even with the most perfect defense. Children would always want to play, to go out to eat, and to have fun. This was a child's nature. It was unavoidable no matter what. In spite of this, one would never know the deadly traps hidden within. No matter how powerful the guardian was, no matter how invincible he was, as long as there was a careless mistake, he would go down the wrong path. No matter how one tried to salvage the situation, to kill the culprit and seek revenge, it would all be futile. There were thousands upon thousands of people who wanted Bauer dead in Tiantang City now. Those with the strongest murderous intent, and those who planned to take action were all in positions of power. Yunyang had done this to eliminate the possibility of being seduced and deceived. In the future, ignore anyone you don't know who talks to you, no matter the situation. As long as it's not ours, we don't want it. Don't talk about what if, don't believe in what if, don't bet on what if. Yunyang paused, seeing Bauer looking at him in confusion. He could not help being stunned. He then called Li Yingqiu over. After saying a few sentences, Yunyang realized that he seemed to have said too much, far beyond Bauer's understanding. He wanted to explain it in simpler terms, but he was at a loss for words. Instead, he asked Li Yingqiu to supplement or translate Yunyang's words so that Bauer could understand. With Li Yingqiu's translation, Bauer could not stop blinking his big eyes, memorizing them seriously as his little head nodded continuously. Bauer is so obedient today, Li Yingqiu exclaimed and said in relief. It looks like only a big city like this can make a difference. Once Bauer is here, it's like he's changed into a different person. He's so obedient, how adorable. Yunyang's heart skipped a beat as he sighed soundlessly. It was late at night. Bauer was already asleep. Yunyang called Li Yingqiu out. After this, Bauer is going to start a high-intensity study. Yunyang pointed at the rows of books in front of him. He has to assimilate these knowledge and master them in the shortest time possible. Also, I think you already know what Bauer's identity is. So, you must be patient with what he should come into contact with. And you must not let him come into contact with anything he shouldn't. Yes. Li Yingqiu's eyes flashed with fear, but there was also an indescribable excitement. Yunyang looked at the lady in front of him, his gaze unwavering. After a long time he continued, do your best, and you will have everything. Do you understand? Li Yingqiu's body trembled as she replied, I understand. Thank you for your reminder, young master. Yunyang dismissed her with a wave of his hand, but he did not rest. Instead he paced slowly in his study. Who was Yunyang? How could he not see the change in Li Yingqiu's mentality? It was a huge psychological change of a person who had no desire for life, but suddenly realized that she could aspire to the pinnacle of the world. At such a time, how could Li Yingqiu's mentality not change at all? However, Yunyang allowed such a change to exist. In fact, anyone who had encountered such an encounter would have their emotions rippling endlessly. It would be abnormal if they were truly indifferent. With this change, it would make Li Yingqiu even more passionate about power, and thus, even more concerned about Bauer's safety and Yunyang's instructions. She knew very well that she had to listen to Yunyang, at least for the next 10 years. She had to listen to him without the slightest bit of disobedience. Otherwise, she would be killed like mowing grass. The most abhorrent thing in this world is human greed and desire. Yunyang murmured. But the most adorable is also. I love human greed and desire the most. That's why I've never been a good person. Luckily I'm not. It was the same night that Bauer moved into the residence of Yin. It was midnight. Someone had snuck into the residence of Yin, intending to do something wrong. It was a pity that before the person could find out where Bauer was staying, he had already encountered someone. A person dressed in snow-white robes with a cold expression. It was Bai Yixue. There was no nonsense, not even a few words. Everything was over with a light flash of sword light. With Bai Yixue's current cultivation base, there were only a handful of people in the entire Yutong who could withstand a single strike of his sword. This was a small test of his skill, but it was truly like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. The next day, looking at the assassin's corpse in the yard, Marquis Yun's expression was indifferent. With a wave of his hand he said, Send the corpse to the Board of Punishments. Don't bother about anything else. There were already people from the palace waiting at the gate. The teachers responsible for the prince's education had been sent over by His Majesty the Emperor. Yun Xiaoyao took a look at them. Each of them was a highly respected and knowledgeable person. In addition, these people had a common trait. They were all impartial and peaceful. It looked like His Majesty the Emperor had put in a lot of effort in selecting talents. This prince will take a look at your preparations first. Yun Xiaoyao said. His Majesty has strict requirements for the eldest grandson's homework progress. There can be no mistakes. As he spoke, he pulled a few people aside, obviously to give them a secret lecture. After all, there were some things that could not be said in public. Other than that, there was another reason: to give Yin Yang some buffer time. He did not know how Yin Yang's preparation was going. No matter what, Yin Xiaoyao had to give him enough time that he thought was sufficient. The entire capital city was shrouded in dark clouds. Countless plans were being carried out in the dark. The residence of the crown prince, the residence of the third prince, the fourth prince, the fifth prince, the sixth prince, the residences of the princes, the residences of the prime minister, the grand tutor, and other high-ranking officials, the residences of the Lung family, the Qiu family, and other famous generals. There were also a few noble families that had been living in the city for decades, even centuries. These forces, these mansions almost everywhere. There were secretive people going in and out, looking like they were in a hurry. Everyone wore a grim expression. No matter how hard they tried to hide it, they could not relax. Someone with sharp eyes recognized that some of His Majesty's Imperial Guards had also appeared in Tiantang City in disguise. With this additional layer of knowledge, the atmosphere in Tiantang City grew even stranger. His Majesty the Emperor had been very busy during this period of time. Every day, he had to deal with matters such as rewarding the generals and soldiers, rewarding them according to their merits, settling the injured soldiers, and comforting the deceased. He was completely devoted to these matters. It was as if he was completely unaware of the undercurrent in the capital city because of this. He was not even concerned about it. In spite of this, those who truly understood His Majesty's thoughts could clearly see that while His Majesty dealt with the affairs of the nation in his most energetic state every day, his temper had become much more violent, and his way of doing things had become much more extreme. Based on Emperor Yu Pei's administrative skills in the past, most of the officials who were obviously absent-minded and had ulterior motives would be lifted high and lowered lightly. He would use both kindness and authority instead of extreme measures. However, during this period of time, whenever an official was found to have made the slightest mistake in dealing with administrative matters, he would reprimand them mercilessly. He would often dismiss them from their posts and banish them from the court, never to be rehired again. Even when he was resting occasionally, his gaze that was focused on the void before him would still flash with a sharp, murderous intent. However, even those who understood His Majesty the most did not truly understand the sorrow in His Majesty's heart at the moment. Previously, when the four countries had laid siege on Yutong, it was as if Yutong was going to be annihilated. Millions of generals and soldiers had charged into the front lines and were buried on the battlefield. Now that the war had ended, it was time for the generals and soldiers to be rewarded according to their merits, settle their families, reassure the loyal souls, and win over the hearts of the people. This was the right intention, the right thing to be done. There was no doubt about it. To the generals and soldiers, this moment was even more important than the moment when they had died on the battlefield. This was because the merits of their lifetime would be determined today. Everything that had happened today concerned the families they missed the most in the battlefield at the border, their future lives, their continuation, and so on. It was the most important thing. Everything else should be compromised for it. However, even at such a time, at such a critical moment, his sons, the princes, were all indifferent, as if this matter did not concern them, hanging high up in the air. There were also many civil and military officials who seemed to have lost their souls. They were only concerned about the succession of the throne and who would be the rightful owner of the throne. Indeed, that was where their future interests lay. How could the orphans and widows, the orphans of the martyrs, be more important than their future plans? They are all unscrupulous and unscrupulous, shameless and insane. His Majesty the Emperor thought to himself. As he looked out the window, another troubling thought came to him. Didn't the people from the school of Kismet State say they're coming to find me? Why isn't there any news until now? It's better to settle this as soon as possible. If it's delayed for too long, there might be more changes. Sigh, I'm not in charge of this. I can only take it one step at a time. Early this morning, a man dressed in white stood on top of a tall mountain outside Tiantang City. He was surrounded by clouds and mist, as if he was riding on the clouds, aloof from the world. The man gazed at Tiantang City from afar. After a long time of observation, his frown deepened. "It's really strange," he murmured to himself. Chapter 545. The man dressed in white frowned. The Empire of Yutong. Where did this nation get the aura of conquering the world? Even when the country was founded hundreds of years ago, its luck was not as strong as it was now, and it had never been recognized by the heavenly axiom. Its luck would only deteriorate with each generation, and at most 7 generations, it would be destroyed under the wheel of the replacement of the dynasty. The current emperor of Yutong is the 6th emperor. Even if there's still some providence left, it should be showing signs of decline. How can it be so strong now? Among all the nations in this world, the empire of Dongxian is the one with the most providence. The empire of Dongxian was founded with great providence. The nation's fortune is long, and its meridians are long. In the 200 years since its founding, the empire has gradually expanded. Ziwei's star is already shining in Dongxian, waiting for its brilliance to shine. That will be the time when Dongxian unifies the world. This is an irreversible destiny. Even in terms of manpower, resources, wealth, and national power, the empire of Dongxian is still the cream of the crop in this world. Its civil and military talents are plentiful, all of them the cream of the crop. It possesses the power to conquer the world. That's why the school issued the state dictum. To acknowledge Dongxian as the ruler of the world, it's to accept destiny and follow the natural order. Yet, why has the weather fallen into unprecedented chaos now? Dongxuan's sure-win battle has actually been defeated? Dongxuan's temporary defeat is still acceptable, but why is the weather in chaos now? A few years ago, the residents of 9 Supremes suddenly descended into this world. While it boosted Yutong's national providence, and seemed to show that Yutong had the chance to conquer the world and unite Tianxian, there's no end to the momentum. Our school has long predicted the residents of 9 Supremes' domineering presence. Their appearance is only the last radiance of the Empire of Yutong. It will only make the Empire of Yutong the focus of all the other nations. The remaining national providence will weaken day by day, indirectly aiding Dongxian in draining the other nations' national power. What happened later also proved our sect's prediction. The 9 Supremes fell in the battle at Tianxian Cliff, and the destiny of the nation formed by the providence of heaven and earth that belonged to the residents of 9 Supremes dissipated completely a year ago. It proved that the providence of heaven and earth cannot be reversed by man, and the destiny of heaven and earth cannot be defied. Using man to fight against heaven will only lead to self-immolation and one's own death. However, the situation has changed, and it has become unrecognizable. He stood in the clouds and frowned, unable to figure it out no matter how hard he thought. Because of this matter, the entire sect has fallen into chaos, and is at a loss as to what to do. He let out a long sigh. The truth was as he said. The entire school of Kismet State had fallen into chaos due to the current incident, splitting into 2 factions. Both sides launched all sorts of verbal attacks. Gradually, it developed to the point of a physical fight. He hasn't appeared for 10,000 years, but the moment he does, he's already made such a big joke. This in itself is already an extremely absurd joke. You didn't even see anything clearly or confirm anything before you sent out the country order. Look at what's happening now. Dongxian has lost. Not only has it lost, even that so-called god of war has been killed by them. The reputation that our sect has accumulated for tens of thousands of years is about to be destroyed in a single day, turning from a revered existence to the top joke in the world. What can we do? The astronomical phenomenon is clear. The stars have fallen on Dongxian, and the purple sun has risen. That's the sign of unification, the qualification to rule. The astronomical phenomenon was indeed. So when the decision was made, why didn't anyone object then? Why didn't any of you object then? Heaven and earth aren't complete. And there's no such thing as an absolute astronomical phenomenon. Why didn't we say so then? What's the use? The sect has always been controlled by all of you. Who dares to say no? We were just angry, but we dared not speak up. Nonsense. It was a unanimous decision made by everyone then. We were prepared to use this opportunity to let the school of Kismet state reappear in the martial world and shock the world. Then, we could restore the glory of 10,000 years ago and seize the 10,000 years of providence. Is this the decision made by everyone? Why is it our responsibility now that there's a mistake? It's preposterous. The decision made that day was indeed a unanimous decision. There's nothing wrong with that. But who agreed to give the Kismet State medallion away? Once that thing is given away, it's a foregone conclusion, a declaration to the world. How could Dongxian not make a big deal out of it when they obtained this trump card? How could many secluded sects that have stayed in the martial world, because of their ancestral teachings, not think about defying heaven and changing their fates? Of course, they wanted to use this opportunity to reappear in the martial world. But once they did, they were met with a disaster. Now it's the school of Kismet State that tricked them. You're being unreasonable. Since the decision was made, the Kismet State medallion must be given away at the same time. What's the point of not giving it away? Keep it in our hands. How can we talk about restoring our prestige then? Moreover, without the Kismet State medallion, do you think Dongxian would have spared no effort in carrying out this matter that day? No matter what you say, the result is that you've made a fool of yourselves and ruined the sect's reputation. You must take responsibility for this. This is a reality that cannot be avoided. The school of Kismet State was in a mess of arguments. It was only in the end that they managed to come to a consensus that was not really a consensus. The reality is as it is. Now that we've come to this stage, it's not that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We can only move forward. The school of Kismet State's reputation cannot be tarnished, and its authority cannot be challenged. Now the only way forward is, no matter what, Dongxian must win this battle to conquer the world. Then, our sect won't have done anything wrong, and the Kismet State medallion's ownership is rightfully theirs. The decision had been made, and the voices within the sect had reached a consensus. However, how could the struggle between the 5 empires for the continent's hegemony be decided by a few people from a mere sect? Even if the sect was filled with peerless experts. However, this did not involve the martial world's final battle, but the ownership of the entire continent's imperial power. Therefore, they first sent a few people to explore the path. It was necessary to know one's enemy as well as oneself. However, this path, how should we explore it? The man in white's face was filled with worry, as if he was about to die from anxiety. This was a huge conundrum that could not be solved. The truth was definitely not as strong as what they had said to the outside world. It was obvious that they had made a mistake, and had already confirmed that they had outsmarted themselves. Therefore, they did not even know where to start to remedy the situation. How could they not be at their wits' end? The man in white frowned for a long time, trying his best to come up with a plan to find the crux of the problem. But it was all a blur, and he had no idea where to start. After a while, the man finally exhaled his melancholy and slowly ascended. He was now 5,000 feet high in the air. This was the highest altitude that his cultivation base could reach. Opening his eyes again, he tried his best to overlook Tiantang City. The whole of Tiantang City was now under his gaze. There was nothing that he could miss out on. My initial prediction was correct, but there's been a shocking reversal now. There must be something wrong with the providence. 99% of this problem lies in the empire of Yutong. No matter how the other countries influence it, it's difficult for them to interfere to such an extent. The place where the empire of Yutong's providence flourishes is none other than Yutong's capital city, Tiantang City. If I focus on observing this city's aura, I should be able to find some clues. The man in white performed the school of Kismet State's unique cultivation method, observing the flow of Tiantang City's qi in detail for an hour. When his cultivation base was gradually reaching its limit, a spark of inspiration flashed through his mind. He finally found a clue. It was also this discovery that shocked the man in white. He did not manage to hold his breath, and plummeted like a meteor. Such an unparalleled expert had almost fallen flat on his face. It's actually here. Why would it be here? These two thoughts struck the man in white's mind at the same time. He could not figure it out no matter how he thought about it, becoming even more bewildered. After a long while, the white-clothed man adjusted his cultivation aura to its peak state. He soared up again, but this time, he focused all of his attention on one spot. The other end of his gaze was shrouded in thick clouds. Where else could it be if not the residence of 9 Supremes? The people of the school of Kismet State were the best at observing the flow of heaven and earth's chi meridians. The empire of Yutong's reversal of the situation had caused its declining providence to flourish. The change was extremely bizarre. While the people of the school of Kismet State were bewildered by the change, they had naturally observed it countless times to figure out what had gone wrong and why such a change had occurred. It was a pity that no one had found any clues. During this period of time, the man in white had seen the residence of 9 Supremes many times, especially the residence of 9 Supremes. He had seen it more than a dozen times, but he had not discovered anything. The only thing he saw was a thick fog that did not dissipate. The thick fog that did not dissipate was a mystical phenomenon that belonged to the residence of 9 Supremes. It had always existed and was no longer strange. However, when he looked down from the highest point this time, he was surprised to find that the residence of 9 Supremes actually existed. The Chi of Celestial Pole? Is it really the Chi of Celestial Pole? Chapter 546. The purple Chi was faintly discernible. It was the second time he had glimpsed it, but he still exclaimed in disbelief. He rubbed his eyes and looked again to confirm. As far as his eyes could see, there was an extremely faint purple glow that flickered from the bottom to the top of the white fog after a long time. It only rose for a moment in the white fog before it disappeared. It was a fleeting moment. In spite of this, the magnificent purple Chi was so real that it was unforgettable. The celestial pole purple Chi. The white-robed man sighed. So that's how it is. The celestial pole purple Chi is used to ascend to the throne of the emperor. What a waste! Who would have thought that the empire of Yutong would have such a thing? What other providence in this world can compete with such a foundation? It would be intolerable if Yutong doesn't rule Tianxian. But this isn't right, this isn't right. The white-robed man frowned as he thought of something. The last time the 5 of us observed the providence of other countries, the residence of 9 Supremes was our top priority. We didn't notice the celestial pole purple Chi in it. If there was, it would be impossible that we didn't notice it. Such a mistake wouldn't exist. Besides, the North Star had already started to shine in Dongxian then. If Yutong already had the celestial pole purple Chi then, the North Star would have been oppressed and attracted and shifted to this side. If that was the case, our judgment wouldn't have been wrong. So, the celestial pole purple Chi isn't something that has been around for a long time, but it has only appeared recently. What's more, it might have appeared due to some special reason. Then, our fall this time wouldn't be considered unjust. It's just that. How could a secular country possibly have such a special providence like the celestial pole purple Chi? Such a mystical providence can only be born many years after the continent has been unified. It would need at least hundreds of years of imperial providence of a super empire to be able to brew. What is going on? Why did such an unforeseen event occur in such a short period of a few months? What happened during this period of time to cause such an unforeseen event? The white-robed man felt his scalp tingle, and his limbs turn cold after his analysis. I clearly saw that the providence of the 9 Supremes had completely dissipated earlier, but I didn't expect the residence of 9 Supremes to hide such a mystical thing. This goes against common sense, a huge violation. After thinking about it for a while, he still couldn't figure it out. Beside him, there was a tall and sturdy man accompanying him. Throughout the entire process, he stood with his head down and his eyes slanted, as if he was at a loss. Hearing him mumble to this point, he finally couldn't help but interrupt. Eldest senior brother, in my opinion, this matter isn't that rare. As long as you want to do it, you can easily do it. The eldest senior brother frowned. What? Why do you say that? Surprised, he thought to himself. It's said that even a wise man can make a mistake, and even a fool can make a mistake. Could it be that I, a wise man, am in the dark under the lamp? This idiot actually thought of something that I didn't think of by chance. As he thought about it, he dared not take it lightly, staring at the burly man expectantly. The burly man felt that he was being respected. With his eyes slanted and his hands behind his back, he said in a deep voice, "It's actually a reverse inference of learning from one's strong points to make up for one's weak points. As long as a certain method is used to extract the providence of one of the 5 empires in this world and transfer it to another empire, the providence of the 2 empires will merge into one. It'll immediately form a providence that's a few times more than the other empires. When the 2 are stacked together, the final level will definitely be greater than 2. Isn't this the case?" The white-robed man was taken aback when he heard it, but he immediately flew into a rage. "Nonsense! This is utter nonsense." The burly man squinted and said, "Eldest senior brother, what are you doing? It's really not impossible." "Nonsense! Shut up." The white-robed man was enraged. "Do you know what the extraction of providence means?" "I really don't." The burly man squinted his eyes honestly. "Do you know that even immortals can't extract a nation's providence?" "I don't." "If providence could be controlled, wouldn't it be much simpler? There are so many almighty beings who can't participate in the nation's war. Isn't it because they're afraid of the countercharge of providence? Do you understand?" "I don't. Shut up if you don't know." The veins on the white-robed man's forehead bulged. I can't explain the complicated relationship to a rascal like you, but judging from the current situation, this accident should be happening in the residence of 9 Supremes," the white-robed man said seriously. "Next, I must go to the residence of 9 Supremes, or perhaps, to talk to the only remaining Supreme Cloud. There must be a talk." The burly man squinted and looked down the mountain arrogantly, not at all upset that he had been called a rascal. "Leopard, send a message to the school immediately. Ask them to come to Tiantang City." The white-robed man sighed deeply and said, "I can basically confirm now that the crux of this incident lies here. As long as the hidden problem in the residence of 9 Supremes is resolved, everything will return to its original state, the established trajectory. The residence of 9 Supremes, or the remaining Supreme of the 9 Supremes, is the source of the current change. Perhaps, as long as we kill the remaining Supreme of the 9 Supremes, all the problems will be solved. On the other hand, if Supreme Cloud doesn't die, the Celestial Pole's Amethyst Chi will continue to exist in the residence of 9 Supremes. Yutong will never decline, and the talk of Dongxian unifying Tianxian will only be a joke." "Yes." The squinted leopard went to send the message without hesitation. The white-robed man stared down the mountain, his gaze flickering with intense murderous intent. "The 9 Supremes, the crux of the problem. 9 Supremes, Supreme Cloud must die. Otherwise, the school of Kismet State's tens of thousands of years of reputation will crumble and vanish." Perhaps, Yun Yang had never dreamed that disaster would fall from the sky while he sat in seclusion at home. Other than the Four Seasons Tower, he had now added an unusually terrifying enemy. In fact, he was even more mysterious than the Four Seasons Tower, and had a deeper foundation. Now, however, Lord Supreme Cloud, whom these 2 super sects wanted to kill as soon as possible, was struggling to explain something in a stuttering manner. Residents of Yin. In the secret chamber, Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan were like 2 enraged female leopards, sitting on chairs and glaring at Yun Yang. "Young Master Yin, I think both of us should have the right to know the truth." Yun Yang was drenched in cold sweat. "Of course, both of you have the right. However, the problem was, how should I say it? It would not do to tell the truth." What Yun Yang regretted the most right now was that he had destroyed Supreme Wind's will. Now facing Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan, Yun Yang was tongue-tied, his mouth parched. His eyes were wide open as he murmured, "Both of you calm down. Let me think about my words carefully. This matter has really happened a long time ago. My memory isn't very good, I need to think about it." "A long time ago," Yu Rulan said coldly. "Only 1 or 2 years ago. How long ago is it? Is it 18 months or 24 months? Is it 1,000 days?" Chapter 547. Yin Yang coughed and said with a bitter smile, Sister Lan, what you're asking about doesn't really have much to do with this young brother. At most, it can only be said to be a coincidence. I really feel that it has nothing to do with me. That's why I don't know where to start when you ask. Please forgive me. Allow me to think about it carefully and choose my words. That way, I'll be able to speak more fluently, and you'll be able to listen to me. Yu Rulan obviously did not believe him. She snorted coldly and glared at him. Ji Lingxi was anxious, but she spoke softly. Think about it slowly and choose your words slowly. We're not in a hurry. Even though she said that she was not in a hurry, her hands that were clenched so tightly that her knuckles were turning white had long betrayed her anxiousness. Yin Yang pondered for a moment and finally sighed, deciding to tell them the truth. After all, it would be pointless to keep it a secret like this. It was cruel to tell them the truth about Yaden's death, but it was even crueler to keep it a secret and watch them search for it all over the world. In order to find Ji Lingfeng's whereabouts, the two women had already wasted several years. Were they really going to let them search without any hope? Endure the torment? Furthermore, their search was not simply wasting their time. The process might be accompanied by unknown risks. Their encounter with Lei Dongtian was already a clear proof. Since there was no more meaning in hiding it, it was better to reveal the truth. It was better to grieve for a while than to worry for the rest of their lives. As for his identity, facing his sister-in-law and eighth brother's younger sister, he would be exposed. So be it. I understand. Follow me, both of you. Yin Yang stood up and led the way. Ji Lingxi wanted to ask what it was that could not be said here and needed to be told elsewhere. But she was pulled back by Yu Rulan, who pulled Ji Lingxi along to follow Yin Yang without a word. Yu Rulan was smart enough to guess from Yin Yang's actions that he was going to tell them a shocking secret. And this secret was related to Ji Lingfeng. In that case, this really wasn't a good place to talk. Although this was the residence of Yin, it was not a place where they could talk about secrets without fear. Because of this, she naturally followed him silently. No matter what, Yin Yang would never hurt the two of them. A place that Yin Yang thought to be safe would at least be more secure than this place, especially when the current matter involved Ji Lingfeng. Even the slightest bit of risk would have to be avoided. The three of them stepped into Yin Yang's courtyard and entered the study. Yin Yang pressed a button casually. A thick and heavy stone wall silently opened up. Yin Yang entered first. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan were taken aback. They had been in the residence of Yin for quite some time now. They had been there when the residence of Yin was being rebuilt, so they had witnessed it with their own eyes. However, they did not know that the residence of Yin had such an ingenious setup. Just by looking at the deep passageway that stretched on without knowing where it ended, it was not difficult to imagine that it was an unusually large project. There was also that stone wall that was at least 30 feet thick. When it was opened, it was completely silent. This was already extremely ingenious and amazing. Both girls were intelligent people. Looking at the setup and recalling Yin Yang's performance earlier, they could not help feeling heavy in their hearts. To talk about the whereabouts of their fiancé and eldest brother, they had to come to such a secluded and private place. This was already a clear indication of the severity of the problem. Just as the three of them entered, the door to the secret chamber closed once again. It was still soundlessly sealed, as if the stone door did not exist at all. At the same time that the door to the secret chamber closed, spots of light gradually lit up the passageway. It continued to stretch out for a very, very long time. Night color stone. Yu Rulan's eyes shone upon seeing it. Yu Rulan was from a noble family and was knowledgeable. How could she not recognize the object of light? The night color stone was in existence even rarer than the luminous pearl. The night color stone was a unique crystal that would only glow in a pitch-black environment. As long as there was a little bit of light in the surroundings, the night color stone would be no different than an ordinary stone. It would not show the slightest bit of abnormality. It was extremely rare. Now, however, there was a night color stone every 30 feet in front of them. The distance between each night color stone was 30 feet, probably because the night color stones could sense each other from a distance of 15 feet. This setup was ingenious, and it was a work of art that surpassed the heavens. Yin Yang's purple silhouette was the first to move forward amidst the bright and silent atmosphere. As he moved forward, the two girls' moods grew heavier. What kind of earth-shattering secret could it be that they needed to come to such a place? They believed that even the royal family's secret treasure would not require such great effort. After a few turns, a hall appeared in front of them. Passing through the hall, Yin Yang pressed on another wall, and another secret door appeared. It was just a glance, but he could already see a considerable number of treasures. The treasures here should be called treasures, because any one of them was of a level that ordinary people might not even see or hear of in their entire lives. More than 99% of those who came here would think that this was the end. Of course, the place where so many rare treasures of heaven and earth were stored should be the end. Even the two ladies had the same thought. They thought that Yin Yang should explain the whole story about Yi Lingfeng. It was already such a secretive place, was it not? Unexpectedly, Yin Yang did not stop. He turned and pressed on the left side where he had just entered. Another secret room's door slowly opened. This was where the blind spot of human thought lay. Even if this place was found by the intruders, they would still be unwilling to give up, so they could only search the other three walls to find the mechanism. They would never have imagined that there was another secret door hidden on the other side of the wall that they had entered from. The essence of this setup was to make it unthinkable no matter what. Yu Rilan and Ji Lingxi looked at each other, seeing the genuine awe in each other's eyes. Both girls were incredibly impressed by Yin Yang's meticulousness and the ingenious setup. It was truly amazing and breathed in amazement. The newly appeared secret room was pitch black. There were no luminous pearls or illumination devices like the night stone, forming a stark contrast to the previous environment. Yin Yang stood at the door and did not step in immediately. Like a statue, he seemed to be hesitating about something. After a while, Ji Lingxi suddenly felt a pang of heartache. Yin Yang's back was right in front of her, tall and straight as usual, but Ji Lingxi suddenly felt an indescribable sense of sorrow and loneliness emanating from his back. A long sigh could be heard as Yin Yang finally stepped into the pitch-black secret chamber. Immediately, he was engulfed in darkness. It was as if Yin Yang had turned into a specter at this moment, becoming one with the darkness. Before the fear in Ji Lingxi's heart could rise, the secret room was lit up abruptly, dispelling the boundless darkness. "Come in." Yin Yang stood quietly in the middle of the secret room. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rilan walked in, following the sound almost unconsciously. Just like before, the secret room's door behind them closed quietly. This change caused this place to instantly become a completely sealed independent space. The two girls who were initially at a loss felt a strange feeling, as if from this moment onwards, this secret room was completely isolated from the rest of the world. Almost at the same time, an unusually oppressive and solemn atmosphere enveloped both of them. The two women looked around and saw a huge painting hanging on the wall opposite the secret room. Rather than saying that there was a painting on the wall, it would be more accurate to say that the entire wall was a painting. Above there was darkness and chaos. Below, there were mountains, rivers, and the earth. It was as if all the mountains and rivers were within it. In the middle of the painting, there were 8 people. 8 masked men dressed in black. One of them, even though his face was covered with a black cloth and his body was covered in black, still exuded an air of elegance. Just by standing with his arms behind his back, he exuded an air of grandeur. The mountains and rivers beneath his feet trembled, earth dragons churned, mountains crumbled and the earth cracked. Despite his imposing presence, his gaze was extremely indifferent, unmoving. The second person stood sideways with his arm extended. The trees in the forest before him were twisted, and their roots tumbled like a group of demons, as they suddenly stretched out their arms. The third person stood quietly on the left of the first person, waves of whiteness clouding the sky beneath his feet. The fourth person stretched out his arms as countless sabers and swords rushed towards his hands. The center of his palms was a metallic aura, shining brightly and captivating. The fifth person's body was boiling, and there was a fire dragon roaring under his body. Looking at it, one could not help but feel a burning sensation. The sixth person's hand was surrounded by thousands of lightning bolts. It was as if the heavenly thunder and earth lightning were gathering densely here. The seventh person had one hand behind his back, while his other hand drew a line in the air. The other end was filled with crimson, a trail of blood stretching for miles. The last person, the eighth person, was dressed in black as well. His entire being soared in the clouds. Only his front and back were filled with billowing winds and billowing clouds. Although his face could not be seen clearly, one of the eyes on the side of his head was bright, gleaming with delight and carefreeness. His silhouette was indescribably dashing and insufferably arrogant. It was as if he was laughing maniacally in front of the vast sky and earth. 8 men in black. Ji Lingxi watched the scene in front of her in shock, feeling as if her soul was being pulled into the painting in an instant. She could not help but blurt out, 9 Supremes. Yu Rilan's eyes were fixed on the last person, the graceful silhouette that soared under the clouds. He was insufferably arrogant, yet there was an indescribable calmness to him. She could not hold back her tears as she murmured, Ling Feng. The bright eyes that looked over seemed to be staring at her from the other side, their gaze filled with kindness. They were calling out softly, Lan Lan. Yu Rilan's nose felt a lump in her throat. She covered her mouth abruptly, trying her best not to cry out loud. However, her bright eyes stared unblinkingly at the pair of bright eyes in the painting through her tears. She broke down at once. That was Ji Lingfeng. Lingfeng, I found you. I finally found you. Chapter 548. Both girls stared at the painting before them in a daze, their eyes brimming with tears. It was only a painting, but the awe-inspiring feeling it gave was as if they were actually there. Their very souls were shaken by it. For a moment, both girls were speechless. At this moment, the so-called beauty, the so-called intelligence were all gone. Their entire attention was drawn to the painting. After some time, Ji Lingxi was shocked to realize that Yun Yang had disappeared from the secret chamber. Where's Yun Yang? Ji Lingxi could not help asking. Yu Rilan was jolted awake by Ji Lingxi's question. Wiping her tears, she turned to search, but Yun Yang was nowhere to be found. Both girls were stunned. Yun Yang had been here just now. But where had he gone to now? The secret chamber was only so big. It could be seen with a single glance. The door to the secret chamber had not been opened since it had been closed just now. Where could Yun Yang have gone? Yu Rilan suddenly had a flash of inspiration. She turned to look at the painting again. It was the same painting, but looking at it now, there seemed to be something different about it. Both girls shared the same thought. Exchanging glances, they were both stunned for a moment. Suddenly, Yun Yang's voice came from the painting. I'm here. The two of them were startled and looked towards the direction of the voice. They saw that the painting of 8 people had now become 9 figures. Behind Ji Lingfeng and Supreme Wind, there was another silhouette amidst the clouds and mist. It was Yun Yang. Yun Yang had actually merged into the scroll, reflecting the two of them with the portrait in the scroll. Ji Lingxi was stunned. What is it? Everything that was happening before them had exceeded Ji Lingxi's knowledge of the world. How could a living person merge into a painting? It was too unbelievable and unimaginable. Yun Yang sighed and left the painting. He floated down and said faintly, I am Supreme Cloud. This was an explanation for what had happened earlier, and also a declaration of his identity. Noticing Yun Yang's footsteps, the two ladies were surprised to see that there was a human-shaped dent where Yun Yang had been standing. Yun Yang had been standing there earlier, as if he had really blended into the painting. There was not the slightest bit of incongruity. What Yun Yang had said now, it was only 4 words, but it was like a thunderclap in the hearts of the two ladies. It made the two girls feel dizzy. Supreme Cloud, the think tank of the 9 Supremes, the youngest of the 9 Supremes, and he was Ji Lingfeng's 9th brother. No wonder he knew about Ji Lingfeng. This painting was made by you? Yu Rilan asked with reddened eyes. Without waiting for Yun Yang's reply, he had already confirmed it. Other than Supreme Cloud, who else could paint such a painting that was both in form and spirit? Even though their faces were covered, and they were only masked and dressed in black, They were able to display that person's unique style with their aura and form. Even the pairs of eyes in the painting were unique in their own way. They were meticulous and detailed, displaying each person's personality vividly and vividly. This is my brother. Jilingxi walked forward and stroked Supreme Wind's portrait, murmuring, "Brother, where are you? Don't you want your sister anymore?" Yu Rulan stared at it blankly as well, tears rolling down her cheeks uncontrollably. There were only 8 people in the painting now. The last Supreme Cloud, was right beside them. Combining it with the rumors from the outside world, the 2 ladies had an epiphany. However, they still dared not believe it. They were unwilling to believe it, hoping for a sliver of luck. Even if they dared not believe it, unwilling to believe it, unwilling to give up on that sliver of luck, the sorrow in their hearts could not be contained, surging from the bottom of their hearts. Yin Yang was silent for a moment, but he still spoke up to break the painful silence before him. Jilingfeng is Supreme Wind of the 9 Supremes. Yin Yang's Adam's apple bobbed as he said dryly, "My 8th brother." Jilingxi and Yu Rulan looked at him blankly, their gazes sorrowful. The girl's eyes were already red, but they forced themselves to keep them wide open, looking at Yin Yang stubbornly, waiting for the answer that was about to come. Even though the girls had already guessed the answer, they would only believe it if Yin Yang said it himself. 9 Supremes as the name suggested were 9. There were only 8 of them in the portrait. There was only one left standing in front of him. It went without saying that this was a foreseen situation. However, the slightest chance of luck was still not extinguished. 8th brother, he has already. Yin Yang closed his eyes, his expression blank like a statue. There was no expression on his face. His hoarse voice sounded like thunder in the quiet secret chamber, each word exploding like thunder. He's already passed away. The battle at Tianxian Cliff, all my brothers have perished. Yin Yang's voice was devoid of emotion. I'm the only one left alone. His heart was being torn apart. This was the first time he had spoken of this with his own mouth. My brothers have passed away. The feeling of saying it personally meant that he had admitted the truth. This was the truth that Yin Yang had tried his best to deny in the past. He did not want to admit it. He did not want to admit it. He did not want to admit it. Today, however, at this very moment, facing 8th brother's younger sister and fiancé, he had to tear open his scar once again. Even if it hurt his heart and soul, he had to say it. Yu Rulan shuddered, but she forced herself not to let her tears fall. She looked at Yin Yang with teary eyes and asked with a trembling voice, "What happened then?" Jilingxi fell limply, her eyes empty and her lips quivering as she murmured, my brother, is gone?" Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath and said, "Our identities are unique. Even among brothers, no one knows each other's true identity and original appearance. That's why Boss said that before we go on a mission, we should all leave our wills, just in case. This is also for those of us who are still alive to have a memory." "Well?" Yu Rulan's eyes shone. She was trembling, but she straightened her back and asked, "Where is it?" "I've destroyed it," Yin Yang said woodenly. 8th brother's will, Supreme Wind's will. I dare not keep it. After all, the implications are too great. I dare not bet on what if. No matter how reluctant I am, I have to ensure its safety." Tears finally fell from Yu Rulan's eyes. Was the last trace of her lover in this world gone? "Although the letter isn't here, I've memorized the contents. Every sentence, every word, I remember them all." Yin Yang bit his lip, his voice trembling slightly, but he quickly suppressed the weakness and sorrow. "You remember them all?" Yu Rulan and Jilingxi looked at Yin Yang hopefully, but they did not speak again. Both of them even held their breaths, waiting for Yin Yang to speak. They knew that since Yin Yang had said so, he would definitely recite Supreme Wind's will. Even if they could not see the letter left behind by their beloved brother with their own eyes, it was still a great compensation to be able to know the contents. Yin Yang took a deep breath and began to recite Supreme Wind's will word by word. Yin Yang was not boasting. In fact, he could recite all the wills of the 9 Supremes brothers that he had seen. The contents of the will had long been imprinted in his heart. Every word, every sentence, even every punctuation mark, Yin Yang could recite them like they were his family treasures. Yun Yang believed that even if another 100 years had passed, he would never forget any of the contents, not even the tiniest detail. I have a younger sister, my only family. My younger sister's name is Jilingxi. Doesn't this name sound nice? Listening to Yun Yang reciting to this point, Jilingxi listened even more attentively. Her ears perked up as she listened attentively. She even sobbed softly, but she did not miss a single word, imprinting her brother's last concern into her heart. As the contents of the will unfolded, Ji Lingfeng recalled the difficult times when he and his younger sister were young, as well as the various grievances he had suffered in the Ji family. Although the content was recited in a humorous tone, Ji Lingxi's tears still fell like rain as she listened to it. Thinking of all the sacrifices her brother had made for her all these years, the sorrow that had already accumulated to the extreme increased to the next level. For a moment, she felt as if her heart was being torn apart, almost fainting from her sobs. Brother, your most beloved younger sister. You left her without even taking a look at her. Why did you leave? Ji Lingxi's eyes were misty as she focused her gaze on the scroll again, on Supreme Wind's silhouette that was fluttering in the wind, murmuring. My younger sister is my darling. Whatever good stuff I have, I'll give it to her first. I'll love and coax her. My younger sister likes to wrinkle her nose when she's angry. Whoever asks my younger sister to wrinkle her nose, I'll crawl out of my coffin and beat him to death. Hearing this, Ji Lingxi could no longer hold herself together. With a sob, she fainted right away. Yu Rilan hugged Ji Lingxi's limp body, her tears falling continuously. Her eyes were wide as she stared at Yun Yang, listening to the rest of the will. She was waiting for the part that belonged to her. Even though there was a tinge of disappointment and panic in her eyes, she did not believe that the will would not mention her, his fiancée. The second is my fiancée. As Yun Yang recited this, Yu Rilan's breathing stopped at once. A soft sob escaped from her throat, and she was completely still, staring at Yun Yang without panting, waiting to hear what Ji Lingfeng had left for her. Just now, Yu Rilan was afraid that Yun Yang would suddenly say that the will was finished, and that there was no more content. There was nothing related to her at all. If that was the case, Yu Rilan felt that she would break down immediately. The other heavy blow after the death of her beloved was not much lighter than the former's grievous news. Luckily, Ji Lingfeng's will had a part related to her. He still remembers me. Among the last traces he left in this world, I am one of them. Yu Rilan's heart was filled with bitterness, sorrow and fear. For a moment, she felt like she was floating in the clouds, like she was stepping on the clouds. You heartless person, do you still remember me? I like her very much. Her name is Yu Rilan, isn't it nice? Other than my younger sister, she's the person I like the most, but she's also the person I've let down the most. Yu Rilan closed her eyes softly, 2 streams of tears trickling down her cheeks. Ji Lingfeng, my dear Ji, with these words of yours, my life is worth it. It's more than enough. As long as I'm alive, I'll marry her. When the 9 Supremes business comes to an end, I'll invite all of you to my wedding wine. All my brothers. Upon hearing this, Yu Rilan's tear-stained face broke into a mournful smile, but there was also a tinge of relief. I've waited for you to marry me. I've waited until now. I've been waiting. But you're not coming anymore. Of course, if I'm really dead, please tell her that I've had a change of heart, that I've married a woman who's more outstanding than her in everything, and that I've gone to live in seclusion. Yu Rilan's expression changed at once as Yun Yang recited these words. Her face turned pale first, then red, before her eyes spat fire as she gritted her teeth, panting heavily. This bastard! How dare he? How dare he? Yu Rilan cursed, but her tears fell once more. The pearl of the flood dragon, for my sister. This piece of jade belongs to Lan'er, you can return it to her. Watching Yun Yang open a secret compartment in the secret chamber, and take out a pearl of the flood dragon, and a piece of jade, Ji Lingxi, who had just woken up, moaned and fainted again. Yu Rilan's slender fingers gripped the piece of jade tightly, as if she was going to crush it into pieces. Still, she carefully treasured it, keeping the piece of jade in her embrace. Back then, I've left a message for Lan'er. When I become a hero, I'll bring 100,000 troops and marry you. My intention has never changed until now. However, if this will were to be read by all of you, it would truly be a hero's dream, a lifetime of beauty. Yin Yang was done. He did not recite the part about matchmaking for Yurulan. He did not miss her. He knew that if he were to recite all of it, Yurulan's heart would definitely be hurt once more. That's all. Yin Yang's voice was hollow. The rest is probably a secret between us brothers. It has nothing to do with you. There's no benefit in knowing it. Yurulan hugged Ji Lingxi and was stunned for a long time. She did not speak for a long time, tears streaming down her cheeks. At this moment, there was no longer any anger or anticipation in her eyes. In fact, there wasn't even any sadness left. Her originally lively eyes were filled with a deathly stillness. Eighth brother's entire life. The only two people he's concerned about are the both of you. Yin Yang said in a low voice, Sister Lan Lingxi, both of you must live well from now on. Don't let eighth brother die in peace. Yurulan said faintly, he's the high and mighty Lord Supreme Wind, serving the country and the people all his life. He's a chivalrous man. How would he remember such trivial things like us? He actually needs you to tell me that he's had a change of heart and married a woman who's better than me in every aspect. He's quite thoughtful indeed. Yin Yang sighed and said, Sister Lan, if I were in eighth brother's shoes, I'd write the same. Yurulan sighed and asked softly, You've written such a will as well? Yin Yang nodded with a bitter smile. The 9 Supremes work together as one. I've done the funeral arrangements that eighth brother has made as well. Yurulan asked, Are there arrangements for the woman you like in your will? Yin Yang chuckled dryly. Sister Lan, you've overestimated me. How old am I? I don't have such thoughts. I've left this out. Yurulan said. So you don't have a woman you like until now? Is that what you mean? Yin Yang paused and pondered for a moment before replying softly, Yes, I don't. Yurulan sighed and said, Brother Yin, you asked us to live well. But you have to live well too. Not only for those of us who are alive, but also for those who have passed away. Yin Yang nodded. Yes, I won't die before I avenge my brothers. Yurulan kept quiet and did not speak further. At this moment, grief filled the secret chamber where the 3 of them were. Words of consolation were meaningless here. Ji Lingxi had fallen into a deep slumber due to excessive grief. Until the 3 of them left the secret chamber. No one spoke along the way. When they were about to leave the secret chamber, Yin Yang was surprised to hear Yurulan murmuring softly to herself. When the matters of us 9 Supremes brothers have come to an end, I'll invite all of you to my wedding. When I become the hero of the world, I'll bring 100,000 strong army to marry you. Lingfeng, if you want to marry me, there's no need for 100,000 strong army. Yurulan was murmuring softly. As long as you say it, it'll be eternal. Yin Yang's heart skipped a beat, a strong sense of sorrow rising within him. At this moment, he suddenly thought of Yin Zuiyu, the other elder brother's widow. Wasn't she also such an infatuated woman? On the same night, Yin Yang had been busy for half a day preparing for the future. Just as he was about to catch his breath and rest after having a meal, Lao Mei arrived with a strange expression on his face. Young master, the 2 ladies have invited you over for a drink. Drink? Yin Yang's eyes widened. Even with young master Yun's intelligence, he was completely unable to understand this invitation. At this time, the 2 women who had suddenly heard the grievous news were probably grieving to an uncontrollable extent. How could they still invite him over for a drink? What kind of explanation was this? Should he not go? Could he not go? Obviously not. Before revealing his identity, Yin Yang had already been unable to resist any of the 2 ladies' requests. It was even more impossible now. Yin Yang went over in bewilderment. At the entrance of the courtyard that the 2 girls lived in, 2 bright red lanterns were hung high up. Looking through the lanterns, one could see that the inside was also covered in red, and the hazy atmosphere was filled with a festive atmosphere. Yin Yang grew even more bewildered as he walked over to knock on the door. It was Ji Lingxi who opened the door. The young lady's eyes were still red, and her face was pale. But her dressing was different from usual. She was brimming with joy, and she even wore a red flower on her head. Yun Yang was stunned. Lingxi Yu. Yun Yang was becoming more and more incomprehensible to what he was seeing. What was going on? Why was it so strange? Ji Lingxi's eyes were brimming with tears, but she forced a smile. It's Sister Yu. He insisted on doing this. I couldn't stop him. Yun Yang frowned. What is it? Why are you dressed up like this? Ji Lingxi did not explain further, but turned to the side to let the door open. Looking inside, Yun Yang could not help being stunned when he saw the actual situation in the courtyard. Everything that he saw made Yun Yang speechless, unable to say a word. There was only a throbbing pain in his heart. Under the light, Yu Rulan was dressed in a bright red wedding gown. Her hair was tied up high, looking like a newlywed. She had makeup on her face and a smile on her face. She was as beautiful as a peach, more beautiful than a flower. Brother Yin is here. Come. Quickly take your seat. Yu Rulan walked over with a smile and grabbed Yun Yang's arm without any hesitation. She said with a smile, Sister-in-law is treating you to a wedding today. Don't go home until you're drunk. I won't let you go if you don't drink too much. At this point, her voice seemed to choke for a moment. Then, she laughed cheerfully and said, Today it should be said that we are inviting all the brothers to the wedding banquet. You have to take part in it too, understand? Yun Yang was stunned when he heard her, the bitterness in his heart growing stronger. For a moment he was speechless. Why are you stunned, Brother Yin? Quickly take your seat. Yu Rulan was calm, her face flushed as she said with a smile. Your eighth brother owes all of you a wedding. It's a big deal. Since sister-in-law is here today, of course, I have to make up for it. Today is also your sister-in-law's and your brother's big day. Brother Yin, as the only guest and the representative of all the brothers, you can't run away from being a witness. Come quickly take your seat. Sister-in-law is going all out today. I'm risking my life to accompany brother-in-law. We won't stop until we're drunk. We won't go home until we're drunk. Listening to Yu Rulan's words, Yun Yang was like a wooden statue, at a loss for what to do as he was pulled into the banquet by Yu Rulan in a daze. The table was already filled with all sorts of dishes. The surroundings were dyed in bright red, symbolizing the festive atmosphere. Yu Rulan's figure was slender and graceful. She was dressed in a bright red wedding gown. Even though her face was still disguised and no longer looked like her real beauty, her silhouette and shadow were still peerless and indescribable. 2 pairs of red candles burned quietly, the red crystalline candlelight brewing and dripping. A pot of fine wine was placed in front of him, exuding a strong aroma. The promise of a lifetime still stands, wandering alone on the path of 3 lifetimes. Where is the love in the sea of hatred and the heavens? A half-pot of wedding wine breaks one's heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.